Hogwarts. I'm more than a Dark Lord. Chapter 1. August 1992, London, Surrey. Privet Drive. The night breeze lightly brushed against the neat hedges lining Privet Drive. The street lay silent and spotless under the pitch-black sky. 12 street lamps stood quietly by the roadside, emitting a warm yellow light. In stark contrast to these warm lights was Harry Potter's desolate mood. Caw. Shush. Hedwig. The startled boy quickly turned back to the cage, addressing the white owl inside. He raised his right index finger to his lips, intentionally lowering his voice. I know you're hungry, but can you wait just a bit longer? Crouched in the cage, Hedwig tilted her head in confusion, her yellow-black eyes showing a human-like shock. She began to doubt if the boy in front of her had gone mad from hunger. What am I even saying? Realizing he was starting to babble, Harry sighed helplessly, soothing the slightly agitated Hedwig, and then laid back down on the desk by the window. His empty stomach protested to its owner. Since sunset, all he'd had was a bowl. Oh, no, only half a bowl of vegetable soup. He gave the remaining soup and vegetables at the bottom of the bowl to the equally famished Hedwig. Although the snow-white owl expressed her dissatisfaction by puffing up her feathers, her food dish was empty once again within minutes. Dong dong. Unable to sleep from hunger, Harry couldn't help but bang his head against the desk, his lightning-shaped scar crumpled up. As for how he ended up in this predicament, it's all the fault of that inexplicable house elf. 3 days ago, Harry Potter was a happy and free little boy, although having to return to Uncle Vernon's house during the holidays made him unhappy for quite a while. Ever since he started at the so-called Hogwarts School of Magic, the uncle, who looked like a fat hippopotamus, completely regarded him as a freak. But being seen as a monster wasn't all bad. Although Uncle Vernon's family treated him worse than ever, Harry spent his happiest month at the Dursleys thanks to magic. Of course, it all came to an abrupt end when that house elf named Dobby arrived. Warning Harry not to go to Hogwarts, ruining Uncle Vernon's long-prepared dinner party, and even causing him to receive a warning from the Ministry of Magic. Of course, the worst thing was that Uncle Vernon found out about his inability to cast spells outside of Hogwarts. Since that day, Uncle Vernon locked him in his room. Apart from waiting for the vegetable soup pushed through the trapdoor, all he could do was stare out the window through the iron bars. And the only thing that made Harry happy was finally discovering why he hadn't received a single letter for half the summer holiday. It was due to the house elf's meddling. The elf intercepted all the letters just to make him forget about Hogwarts. Every time he thought about this, Harry's slightly uplifted spirits would sink again. Although he knew he had friends at Hogwarts, what good was that now? His friends wouldn't know the plight of the famous Harry Potter. Moreover, he thought he might starve to death in the room before the school year began. No, he had to save himself. The somewhat dejected boy raised his hand and patted his cheek. Even without magic, or even if he used it, he wasn't sure he could escape the room, but there was always hope. This afternoon, when he woke up hungry, he saw an owl fly into number 12 Privet Drive across the street. At the time, to confirm it wasn't a hunger-induced illusion, he watched at the window for 20 minutes until he saw the homeowner open the window and release a gray-brown owl. Upon seeing this scene, Harry nearly screamed. There was a good chance the homeowner was also a wizard. It turned out there was a wizard living on Privet Drive. This discovery surprised Harry, but also filled him with hope. If the person knew there was a little wizard starving to death just across the street, they would surely help, right? Determined, Harry tore a piece from his bedsheet. Unable to find a pen, he used his finger to dab the dust in the corner of the room. After nearly a week without cleaning, there was plenty, and wrote down his plight, letter by letter. At this point, Harry didn't care if his cry for help would breach the Secrecy Act. If seen by a muggle, even if it meant execution, it was much better than being locked in Uncle Vernon's house for life. After writing the last letter, Harry unfolded the cloth and checked it. Confirming the content was correct, he looked around and chose a broken camera. His room was filled with his cousin Dudley's toys, although they were all broken. Wrapping the camera and cloth together, he pushed apart the bars with his hands and hurled them with all his might. Clang. Although Harry was a bit malnourished, the cloth bundle hit the streetlight with a clang before rolling into the garden across the street under Harry's hopeful gaze. As he watched the package disappear in the grass, Harry finally took a deep breath. This was his last hope, Until he had enough to eat again, he definitely didn't have the strength to throw the package that far again. Now he could only hope the wizard across the street was diligent and would tidy the garden, before Harry starved to death by the Dursleys. Hoot hoot. For some reason, Hedwig flapped her wings uneasily in the cage, and hearing the noise, Harry quickly shushed her again. Quieter, Hedwig, don't wake Uncle Vernon. I don't want another scolding. Harry lay on the floor, staring blankly at the moon in the night sky, until the silver crescent was obscured by a shadow. What on earth? Seeing a turquoise car appearing by the window, Harry could hardly believe his eyes as he rubbed them. Ron. He saw the head sticking out of the car's rear window, red hair, a face full of freckles, and a long nose. Hey, Harry, how's it going? The red-haired boy asked with a smile. After a brief explanation and a series of twists, amidst Uncle Vernon's roars, the turquoise car roared into the sky, racing towards the moon. Hedwig spread her wings, and Harry stuck his head out of the window, the free wind brushing against his thin face. The great savior, Harry Potter, escaped the cage that imprisoned him today. At this moment, he had already tossed aside his last hope from 10 minutes ago. Meanwhile, above the departing vehicle on Privet Drive, a brown owl hovered in the air. After circling twice, it quickly found its target among the rows of identical townhouses. It flew straight down onto the second-floor windowsill. The window was open, and a slender, pale hand reached out from inside, cradling the owl and drawing it into the room. Behind the wind-blown curtains, a pair of deep blue eyes gazed at the star and moon-filled skyline now empty of all else. What was that? Surrey. Little Whinging. Privet Drive. The third bedroom on the second floor. For Mr. William Richard. A seal in the shape of a shield entwined with an eagle, a snake, a lion, and a badger fell onto the table, and the thick parchment unfolded, letters written in green ink flowing gracefully. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster. Albus Dumbledore. Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, First Class Order of Merlin, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. Dear Mr. Richard, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a fifth-year student at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The term begins on September 1st. Basic supplies have been prepared for you and will accompany your journey to the castle. As you know, the Decree for the Reasonable Restriction of Underage Sorcery prohibits students under the age of 17 from using magic outside school grounds. However, due to your unique circumstances, the Ministry of Magic has gratefully agreed to assign a professor as your guide and will assist you in procuring additional supplies needed from Diagon Alley. A list of required books and equipment is enclosed with this letter. We await your reply by owl no later than August 5th. Deputy Headmistress Minerva McGonagall. Why does the procedure seem even more troublesome than last time? The boy furrowed his brow slightly as he flipped through the parchment in his hand, and a slightly smaller letter fell out from the fold. Break with a Banshee, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Gadding with Ghouls, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Holidays with Hags, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Travels with Trolls, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Voyages with Vampires, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Wanderings with Werewolves, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Year with the Yeti, by Gilderoy Lockhart. A Magic Wand. Students may bring one owl, one cat, or one toad. No, who on earth is this Gilderoy Lockhart anyway? Having just experienced his second time travel in his life, William felt a bit confused, with a sense of familiarity mixed with unfamiliarity that left him somewhat bewildered indeed. As a time traveler, even a two-time traveler, William had just arrived in this world barely half a month ago, or rather, this time point. 15 days ago, he was still in 1892, a century ago, having just graduated from the best magic school in all of Britain, Hogwarts, concluding his 3-year learning journey. The model student, William, who personally ended the Goblin Rebellion, applied for a professorship with Hogwarts, then Headmaster Phineas Nigellus Black, and became the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts. At the time, the current Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Professor Hecate, was unwell, with many ailments due to her past life as an unspeakable. But before William could receive a reply from the headmaster, while studying a time turner confiscated from a black wizard, perhaps. William was not too sure about the reason either, but it should have been an experimental accident leading to another time travel. He ended up directly in London, more than 100 years later. But this accident seemed to have brought no further serious consequences. William looked at his hand, which seemed smaller than he remembered. He appeared to have reverted to being 15 years old again. Time is indeed a mysterious thing. Thinking of this, William raised his hand to touch the pendant hidden inside his collar. The time turner was now completely broken. After confirming that magic could still be utilized in this world, William promptly found an empty house to stay in. The owner of the villa was likely away traveling, and after using a muggle-repelling charm to ensure he wouldn't be noticed, he settled in with ease. Yes, that's how we wizards are. And today, a week later, he received another letter of acceptance from Hogwarts, even entering directly as a fifth-year student once again. By Merlin, he had just passed the NEWT. Nastily exhausting wizarding tests, and now they're asking him to retake the OWL. Ordinary wizarding levels exams. This is like only having attended 3 years of school, but having to repeat senior year each time, isn't it? Though these exams weren't much for him, a time traveler with a golden finger, still, it felt a bit odd. As for that time traveler standard golden finger, perhaps it's better not to call it a golden finger. William would rather call it a talent. After all, it wasn't some simple, crude power-up or lottery panel. His golden finger was a sensitivity to a special presence known as ancient magic, and under the influence of this ancient magic, nearly every spell William learned could be enhanced to varying degrees. For example, a group Expelliarmus, theoretically invincible Protega, and even a group Avada Kedavra. Oh, is that something to be said? Many spells that seemed difficult to most were almost a matter of looking at once for William. Besides one professor, almost no one knew of William's ability. That professor also died at the end of William's 5th year. Before discovering this talent, William, on his first journey to 1889, felt very unfamiliar with this world. As a victim of exam-oriented education, he had never read Harry Potter as a child, nor did he have any interest in such children's books growing up. Apart from knowing this was a magical world, the protagonist's name was Harry Potter. He was a little boy with glasses, and Britain had a magic school called Hogwarts. Besides these, everything else was unknown to him. So, after enrolling, he tried to find the so-called boy who lived savior. But it was clear, after enduring nearly half an hour of inexplicable stares from different people, William believed he had discovered the truth. It seemed he had arrived at the wrong time, too early, though he didn't know by how much, but definitely too early. In 1892, even the Qing dynasty was still lingering on. But soon, he abandoned these jumbled thoughts, for after all, compared to exploring the sea of magic, he truly had no interest in helping some scarred boy defeat the Dark Lord. Later, applying to stay on was also William's attempt to remain at school. Aside from the reason to guard ancient magic, not to mention that the employment environment for wizards at the end of the 19th century wasn't great. With Hogwarts' vast library that one would want to dive into, professors could borrow restricted books without limitation. But unfortunate it was, as Williams planned, magic research had yet to take off. It faltered halfway. In this life, even if he didn't receive an acceptance letter, he had to find a way back to Hogwarts. Fortunately, now he has the chance again. First time's a charm, the second time's more acquainted. What's another 3 years after the first 3 years? Collecting his thoughts, William, by now well familiar with the magical world after 3 years, quickly penned a reply and placed it into an envelope, handing it to the brown owl perched on the windowsill, pecking at cookie crumbs. Hoot! Swiftly pecking away the cookie crumbs on the windowsill, the owl clutched the envelope William handed over, flapping its wings to fly into the pitch-black night sky. Clap! Clap! Sweeping the cookie crumbs off the windowsill, William stood up and left his desk, his loose deep blue robe swaying slightly with his movements. Looking at the dawn creeping in from the horizon, he, awakened by the roaring from across the street, had no intention of lying back down in bed. The suitcase leaning against the table flew open, spreading itself on the floor, the clasps popping open, and instead of being packed with belongings, the suitcase revealed a dark entrance. Gripping the ladder protruding from the suitcase's edge, William flipped himself inside. Soon, William stood at the bottom of the suitcase in a very cramped space, racks teetering with an assortment of bizarre things: Ashwinder eggs, eel eyes, dung bombs, and some items William couldn't even name. Having lived in the magical world for only 3 years, William had much to learn. When do you plan to let me leave? A somewhat hoarse voice resonated eerily, and from the darkness in the corner of the room, a grayish face emerged, with a man's face nearly covered in hair, and sharp canines jutting from his lips. Be patient, Mr. Fennerer, soon, no more than 3 days at most. William replied nonchalantly, his tone light-hearted and unhurried. You promised me, as long as I cooperated with you, you'd let me go. The man suddenly became agitated and tried to free himself from his restraints. The ropes binding his hands grew tighter the more he struggled, causing him excruciating pain. He couldn't help but let out a low growl of pain, his facial features scrunched up in agony. I said, wait another 3 days. William's expression remained unchanged despite the man's growls. He waved his hand in the air. Accio Billywig Stinger. In the next moment, a bottle filled with Billywig Stingers flew off the shelf and landed steadily in William's palm. That's what you said 3 days ago. The man growled, his voice sounding as if it was forced out of his throat. Ah, did I say that? Picking up a small knife and another empty bottle from the table, William bent down in front of Fenner. The sharp blade sliced across the man's cheek, and fresh blood slowly trickled down the cut. You never intended to let me leave, did you? Despair coursed through the man's contorted face. Never before had he felt this helpless when facing a wizard one-on-one. The fear this young wizard caused him was second only to that of the one whose name cannot be spoken. But William, he looked merely 16 or 17, a Hogwarts student, perhaps. At his age, shouldn't he be attending school instead of casting spells outside of it? Smart. Do you want a reward? William said nonchalantly as he sealed the now full glass bottle of blood. He stood up and sat down next to the only table in the room, placing the summoned stingers on his right. With a casual wave of his hand, the wound on the man's face began to slowly heal. I just want to leave now. You can't keep me locked up like this, it's against wizard law. Does wizard law say it's prohibited to detain a werewolf trying to bite people on a full moon? William's retort left Fenner speechless for a few moments, after which the man started howling in anger, spouting the vilest curses he could think of, but soon enough, his lips were magically sealed shut. Finally, peace and quiet. This werewolf was encountered by William half a month ago when he first arrived here. Having nothing on him, he intended to find a black wizard to try his luck, and stumbled upon this werewolf who was planning to break into a house under the full moon. Werewolf. This incurable contagious disease always left its victims with a desire to wreak havoc on society. William had met many such dangerous individuals. That night, unable to find any other black wizards by dawn, the werewolf named Fenrir Greyback became his only trophy. As it turned out, the werewolf was carrying a suitcase enchanted with the Traceless Extension charm, filled with common magic materials, which he claimed was a delivery to Hogsmeade. For some reason, William always felt this werewolf gave off the vibe of a Noob Village treasure box monster. Regarding the explanations given, William didn't quite buy them. Why would someone trust an unpredictable werewolf to transport and guard a suitcase with an extension spell enchantment on it? And this suitcase filled with magic materials. Unless whoever gave the task was out of their mind. But when a werewolf brings materials right to your door, William had no reason to refuse. So, he decided to start a project. Knowing that all werewolves lose control on full moon nights. On the flip side, this involuntary transformation actually strengthens these inherently weak-bodied wizards. By understanding the relationship between werewolves and moonlight, perhaps he could develop a potion or tool to enhance oneself using moonlight. Just like Sailor Moon. The passage of time seems to fly by during research, compounded by the suitcase's environment indistinguishable between day and night. By the time William emerged from it, 2 full days had passed outside. Nearing starvation, he decided to whip up some ramen in the kitchen. It was the only food the villa's previous owner left that William found palatable. Don't even mention the fish pie in the fridge. There was always the option to eat out, however. Does it make sense to hunt for food in the London, where of 10 Michelin-starred restaurants, 9 are French and the other Italian? Not to mention, he's currently quite far from London City. Forgive him, but William's taste buds have been spoiled and would never accept fish and chips. Sitting at the dining table, watching tomato slices queue to dive into the pot, William wiped his mouth. Truth be told, He began missing the compliant little elves in Hogwarts kitchens. He wondered if the century-old Chinese recipes he shared with them had been lost. Setting aside half a bowl of noodles, William remembered he had a captive. Before he came upstairs, the werewolf's eyes were practically green with hunger. This mundane yet amusing lifestyle continued for about a week. Despite William's desire to find a black wizard to try his luck, it seemed the famed wizards had vanished after a century in the UK. Did the Great War in World War II wipe out all the black wizards? August 12, Wednesday. An oddly dressed visitor came to Privet Drive today. Even with the harsh summer sun overhead, he was still cloaked under a thick black robe. Greasy black hair clung to the man's gaunt cheeks, with a prominent hooked nose and curled lips complementing his sallow complexion. The long black robe billowed behind him as he walked, making him appear like an oily bat. The man scanned the house number plates with his black eyes until he found the numbers, 12, in brass. His gaze shifted slightly. He headed quickly into the garden, making his way to the front door, but a bundled-up rag blocked his path. H. Seeing the capital letter sticking out from the rag, the man's gaze flickered. After a moment's hesitation, he bent down and picked up the blue rag, unfolding it. The morning dew had made the contents nearly unreadable, but the man could still discern the signature at the bottom. Harry Potter. The man's tone lingered as images of those striking green eyes appeared before him, and a face he loathed. He instinctively turned to look back at the house behind him, recognizing it as number 4 Privet Drive, home to Harry Potter's foolish Muggle relatives. He noted the newly re-secured iron bars on the upstairs window, then lowered his gaze to the rag still hinting at a plea for help. Giving a cold snort, he tucked the rag into his cloak's pocket. The mischief-prone brat, it's best if he's locked at home unable to go to Hogwarts. The old man kept harping about that so-called magic of love. Let Harry Potter stay with his family then, when you know who returns, he can use that magic to love him to death. Smirking as he hid the rag, the man resumed his walk towards 12 Privet Drive's front door, unaware his every move had been closely watched by someone sipping coffee at a window above. Ding! The doorbell rang, and the door opened from the inside to reveal a boy, only half visible. You should. The man lifted his chin slightly, beginning to speak softly. I have no money or food for you, but the old lady next door is quite kind. The boy gestured to the house on the left, speaking sincerely, perhaps you could try your luck over there. Oh, and no need to thank me. Click. Under the man's gaze, the just opened door closed once more. Knock, 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 knock. The wooden door was being knocked so forcefully that the impatience of the person outside was evident from the urgent sound. I already told you I don't have any money. Raising his hand to open the door, Mr. Richard, who was a bit financially embarrassed due to not hitting autumn wind, muttered softly. The man's face at the door turned even darker than before. He took a deep breath, his pitch-black pupils staring intently at the boy in front of him, his words squeezed out through clenched teeth. I am a professor at Hogwarts, Severus Snape. A professor at Hogwarts. Looking at the black bat outside the door, William's face still showed a hint of doubt. Snape obviously noticed this too and was furious. It took him a while to barely squeeze out a nasal sound, from his nostrils. Oh, I apologize, Professor Snape. Realizing such an identity couldn't possibly be impersonated by a vagrant, William quickly stepped aside to let Snape into the house. I just saw you picking up trash in the yard and thought I was. Snape quickly walked into the living room, attempting to explain his behavior but ultimately choosing to drop it, and looked around. So, where is your father? I don't have a dad. Then you. I don't have a mom either. William blinked somewhat confusedly. So the wizard school doesn't do background checks before admissions. They just ask these questions directly face to face. Snape was silent for half a minute due to the short exchange of 3 sentences. Hogwarts did make a background check. Minerva McGonagall, the deputy headmistress, was always diligent and responsible, unlikely to forget these except Snape never looked at it. He rarely took on new students during the summer, especially not transfer students in their 5th year. This was supposed to be Professor McGonagall's task, but with Muggle-born little wizards being unusually numerous this year, an overwhelmed Professor McGonagall had to choose between Snape and Rubeus Hagrid. And the outcome was obvious. William Richard. Snape forced himself to clear his throat with a feigned calm. That's me. William nodded. It seems the greasy-haired professor plans to let this matter slide. Since you're an orphan, of Muggle descent and willing to enroll at Hogwarts, you must be very curious about the magic world. Swallowing the word, orphan, back, Snape began in a very peculiar tone. Of course. William's face showed just the right amount of curiosity and excitement, like a Muggle who has never witnessed magic. That's good. I'll show you the wonders of the magic world. Snape nodded with satisfaction. Minerva's taught process was useful, though his wording was a bit inconsistent with his temperament. He revealed his hand hidden under the cloak, and his distinct jointed fingers were pinching a slender wooden stick. Snape scanned the room and finally looked at the dirt in the corner of the living room, lightly waving the magic wand in his right hand. Tergio. As if an invisible force surged from the stick, the stubborn stains on the floor vanished in the blink of an eye. Having done all this, Snape turned around and stared at William standing at the dining room entrance. Wow, is this magic? A completely unconvincing exclamation. William was truly not a thespian. Certainly. Next, I'll take you to Diagon Alley to procure the supplies you need for school, and once you have your own magic wand, I'll teach you some basic knowledge about magic. Though the boy's reaction felt odd, Snape continued following Professor McGonagall's taught process. Diagon Alley. Where is that? How do we get there? William asked. By subway. No. Since you're already in the 5th grade. Snape raised his hand to push back the hair in front of his eyes, revealing a slight smirk before reaching out to grab William's arm. Then he grasped air. Professor, the bathroom is behind you. Instinctively dodging the oily-haired hand, William looked up at the baffled Snape and pointed to a spot behind him. What do you mean? Snape widened his eyes, staring at William intently. There's shampoo by the sink. Though it's not magical shampoo, I mean, if your hair requires special shampoo. William tried to use a more tactful tone. But these words seemed quite offensive to Snape, who stared at William with growing anger. You. All right, pretend I never said it. So Professor, what should I do? Pivoting to stand beside Snape, William interrupted Snape, preventing the impending eruption. Snape, seemingly reminded of his professor status by this, suppressed his growing rage. Grab my arm. Oh. Snap. Snap. With a piercing, snap, sound, the two standing in the living room vanished from sight. London, Diagon Alley. Ahem. Ahem. William took a deep breath, easing the churning sensation in his stomach. He still wasn't used to the sensation of apparition. Compared to this method of travel, akin to being squeezed through a soft tube, he preferred flow powder or a broomstick. This is Diagon Alley. With no sign of the nausea William expected, a somewhat dissatisfied Snape shook off the boy's hand from his arm. I need to attend to some matters. You can wander around here by yourself. After 2 hours, meet me at Flourish and Blots. I don't like being late. With that, he swirled his cloak and turned to leave. Wait, Professor. What? My scholarship, Professor McGonagall promised me in her letter. Hogwarts has excellent policies for little wizards without guardians, including scholarships. William's letter mentioned his lack of funds, which was the truth, since the werewolf had nothing besides a box of ingredients and was equally penniless. Snape grunted, pulling a heavy pouch from his cloak and casually tossed it to William. Use it sparingly. Hogwarts scholarships aren't meant for you all to waste. Thank you, Professor. Watching the disappearing silhouette in the crowd, William turned back to the Diagon Alley he had long missed. Pulling out the shopping list sent by Hogwarts from his pocket, William hesitated for a moment before heading towards Florine Fortescue's ice cream shop. To grab a bite first. Harry Potter's face showed an expression of panic. He had just escaped from the Borgin and Burke's shop, unsure of his current location, but the shops lining the streets, clearly related inescapably to dark arts, unmistakably told him. He definitely wasn't in Diagon Alley. Harry raised his hand to press on his broken glasses, striving to observe his surroundings. Harry had already forgotten about Malfoy and his father, and his immediate priority was clearly to escape this place. Squinting hard, Harry tried to read a road sign outside a shop selling poison candles, but just as he backed up trying to focus, he felt as if he bumped into someone. Sorry, Harry quickly turned to apologize, but when he clearly saw the people before him, he immediately regretted why his glasses were only broken and not lost. This way, he could pretend not to recognize the group before him. Harry Potter, why are you here? Snape squinted, staring at the boy who shouldn't be in this place, word by word, while behind him stood Malfoy father and son, who had just sold things at Borgin and Burke's. The panic on Harry Potter's face turned into terror. Professor. Harry felt his throat starting to itch. Compared to facing both Draco Malfoy and Severus Snape at the same time, he'd rather it be a three-headed, foul-smelling troll standing in front of him. Even those stupid, clumsy bad guys looked much more adorable than these three people. Harry Potter. Harry closed his eyes in despair when he saw the boy to Snape's right take 2 steps forward, Draco, with a pale face and hair slicked back to his scalp, staring at Harry with a weird smile. The famous savior actually in Nocturne Alley, are you here to buy dark magic materials? The boy's voice was loud, and Harry felt many eyes staring at him. Then why are you here? Is it because there are too many contraband items at home? You're worried the Ministry of Magic will investigate, so you came here to sell them off. Harry retorted unwillingly. He had just seen everything in Borgin and Burke's shop and naturally knew why the other was in Nocturne Alley. He finally knew where this place was. But knowing the name didn't seem to help. Perhaps it was countless miles from Diagon Alley. Unexpectedly, Harry dared to talk back under such circumstances, causing an unnatural pink hue to appear on Draco's pale face. He wanted to say something more, but Lucius Malfoy, standing by, raised his hand to stop him. Dad. Draco protested discontentedly. Shut up, Draco. Mr. Malfoy, whose purpose Harry had revealed with a single sentence, had a somber expression. His gray eyes stared at Harry, somewhat pleased at Draco's reprimand before finally turning to the silent Snape. I'll take my leave. After Snape nodded, Mr. Malfoy pulled Draco's arm and walked towards the other side of the alley, muttering lowly, can't even win an argument, better off raising a block of lard than you. Mr. Potter, you haven't explained to me why you're here. Snape's emotionless voice made the smile at Harry's mouth stiffen. The man leaned down, his sallow, thin face up close to the boy's, saying word by word, so, did Dumbledore misjudge? So the savior he thought you were is nothing more than a second-year student touching dark magic, just like you know who. No, you lack the ability, you'll just end up being a vile, ugly, black wizard. No, I'm not. Harry tried to argue, his face flushed, but Snape rudely cut him off the next moment. Anger filled the man's eyes, but for some reason, Harry always felt those emotions weren't directed solely at him. I thought you were still locked up by that idiotic Muggle family. Honestly, letting you out was a mistake. A troublemaking little wizard like you should be away from Hogwarts, perfectly, since someone nearly broke the confidentiality during the summer. As Snape spoke, he pulled a piece of rag from under his robe. Harry recognized the familiar pattern on it. How did that cloth end up in his hands? Maybe I can. Seeing the confusion and fear in Harry's eyes, the curve of Snape's lips grew more pronounced. Harry. Harry had never found such a familiar call so pleasant. He turned his head in the direction of the voice, a giant almost twice as tall as everyone else and 4 or 5 times wider squeezed through the crowd, his face almost completely hidden by tangled long hair and a thick beard. Hagrid. Harry's voice, made hoarse from tension, was tinged with surprise. At the moment, Hagrid seemed no different from a glowing angel to him. And Snape. Professor. Hagrid stopped beside them, observing the two almost face to face. What are you doing in Nocturne Alley? HMPH. Snape seemed to have finally regained his calm, not answering Hagrid's question but straightened up, turned on his own. Potter, I'll leave him to you. Okay, you're leaving. Hagrid watched the man's disappearing figure around the corner, scratching his head in puzzlement. Hagrid, Snape was going to harm me. If you had been a minute late, watching Snape's vanishing shadow, Harry, filled with lingering fear, quickly told Hagrid. Don't speak nonsense, Harry. Snape is a professor at Hogwarts and a trusted ally of Dumbledore. He won't harm you. But, alright, let's get out of here. This is not a place for a little wizard to be. Hagrid grabbed Harry's arm and dragged the boy around the narrow, cramped alley until a ray of sunlight hit his face. Harry saw Gringotts in the distance, realizing he had returned to Diagon Alley. After reuniting with the Weasleys and retrieving money from Gringotts, Harry finally joined Ron and Hermione. When Harry recounted his experience in Nocturne Alley, Hermione opened her mouth in disbelief. Did he really say that? I mean, did Snape really say those things to threaten you? Hey, Hermione, Harry wouldn't lie about this. Ron interrupted Hermione's doubts. Snape's always been this kind of bad egg. This isn't the first time he's wronged Harry, we all know. But that time it was Quirrell. Hermione referred to their first-year Quidditch match where she saw Snape casting a spell on Harry and set fire to his cloak, but Harry later learned from Quirrell that it wasn't Snape, and she always felt guilty about that misunderstanding. It makes no difference. Ron rudely interrupted Hermione again, causing her to pout unhappily. Let's not talk about Snape, how about we look around? Watching the two about to argue, Harry skillfully changed the subject, even though he had brought it up. Then the three of them, each holding a strawberry peanut butter ice cream from Florine Fortescue's, wandered aimlessly around Diagon Alley. Ollivander's wand shop. Please put the ice cream over here. Watching the boy eagerly eating his ice cream, Garrick Ollivander said with some helplessness. All right. William agreed verbally, but his tongue still kept scraping the ice cream, until Mr. Ollivander urged him again. William Richard, right. The silver-marked measuring tape began automatically measuring William's size. Transfer students entering Hogwarts in the 5th year are rare. Since I've been running this shop, I haven't seen one before. Which arm do you use for your wand? Right hand. William instinctively compared the elderly man with the wand seller from a century ago. The current one seemed a bit more eccentric. After a series of standard questions, William held the first magic wand Mr. Ollivander handed him. Try this, redwood, dragon heartstring, 12 inches long, a wand of fortune. Oh. Sparkling sparks erupted from the wand's tip as William waved it. Nice feel, the grooved handle felt good in hand. Except for the final showdown, he never fussed over a wand, he often ended up using wands picked from dark wizards. So this one. He picked up his leaning ice cream again. Alright, there aren't many wizards who match with a wand on the first try. Having been used to everyone trying at least 3 or 4, Mr. Ollivander sighed, slightly forlorn. That'll be 7 galleons. Inflation's that bad. William's eye twitched as he fished out 7 shiny galleons from his pouch. How many ice creams could that buy? Not long after leaving the wand shop, William dusted off the dirt he collected inside and walked, list in hand, towards Flourish and Blott's. Then he noticed the crowded entrance at Flourish and Blott's bookstore. He scanned the crowd, finally drawn to a cluster of red heads. Harry. He heard someone call out. William paused, the tongue that was licking his 4th ice cream of the day, looking at the boy's lightning scar emerging from the crowd. To be honest, he had assumed he'd have no connection to this world's protagonist. So, did he get his crossing right this time? Isn't this Harry Potter? In front of Flourish and Blott's, the crowd formed a circle and made way, revealing the second protagonist in the bookstore today, and the savior, at this moment, was looking bewilderedly at the man smiling and charging toward him. The man in the blue and purple wizarding robes maintained his perfect smile, showing 8 teeth, and the pointed wizard hat slowly slid down with his movements, yet it still stubbornly clung to the edge of his golden wavy hair. The man grabbed Harry's arm with one hand while tightly shaking hands with Harry with the other. He quickly raised his brows at the bouncing photographer nearby, and the next moment, accompanied by the flash of purple smoke, the camera flashes started to ceaselessly twinkle. Is this the protagonist of the Harry Potter story? Judging from appearance, it doesn't seem particularly special. Standing on the edge of the crowd, William stuffed the entire ice cream cone into his mouth, then brushed the crumbs off his hands while observing the black-haired boy being forced to stand awkwardly in the center of the crowd, expressing the above opinion. But this is a wizarding world, maybe he has great talent, who knows? William never shied away from guessing others in the worst way, just like he had single-handedly defeated most of Rookwood's wizards, but in retrospect, he always attributed it to his good luck, as many spells had just grazed his scalp. Thankfully, he cast the killing curse quickly. This September, I shall become the defense against the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. A sudden exclamation interrupted William's thoughts. He finally turned his gaze toward the adult wizard whose smile was so bright it was almost blinding. Is this the guy who's making him buy 7 or 8 more books? He calculated, and this was almost a third of his scholarship. William's fingers twitched slightly on his wand. He really hated the feeling of someone snatching galleons right out of his pocket. But reason stopped him from casting an evil curse on this toothy professor. He turned his head to look at the poster on the wall. An internationally renowned author and personality, recipient of the third-class Merlin Order, honorary member of the Anti-Dark Magic Alliance, five-time winner of the Wizard Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. Honestly, he's never seen someone with so many titles except for the Albus Dumbledore he saw on a chocolate frog card. He is still the current headmaster of Hogwarts, hoping that white-bearded old man is a bit more approachable than Phineas Nigellus Black. Don't, Arthur. Just as William was about to make his way through the crowd to spend that third of his galleons, a scream pierced the air, followed by an enormous figure pushing through the crowd. Clear out, gentlemen, clear out. The nearly 3-meter giant's height was imposing. William instinctively stopped and moved aside. Meanwhile, at the other end of the crowd, the previously orderly arranged bookshelves were now scattered on the ground. Two figures, struggling together, were pulled apart by the giant, one in each hand. A man with long, light golden hair tidied his messy locks. Even though his right eye had become enormously swollen from being hit by a spellbook, he raised his hand and stuck an old textbook into the arms of a little red-haired girl. Here you go, little girl, hold your book, it's the best thing your dad can give you. Saying this, the man dragged a boy who looked only a few sizes smaller than him out of the crowd, but William didn't shift his gaze away just because it seemed to be over. He had been staring at the old Transfiguration Technique textbook in the girl's hands. In William's vision, that textbook was emitting a faint blue-gold light. Ancient magic. Seeing an old friend for the first time since crossing over, William raised an eyebrow in surprise and instinctively began to walk in that direction. You haven't bought your textbooks yet, Mr. Richard. A drawling voice suddenly sounded behind William, who, caught off guard by the ancient magic, subconsciously dodged the hand that followed closely, pressing on his shoulder. His right hand wand directly pointed upwards, a pale red glow brewing at the tip. It seems you've gotten along well with the new wand. Snape looked at the redwood wand pointing at his throat, speaking nonchalantly, but judging from his floating, immobile hand, he wasn't as calm as he appeared. Professor Snape. William seemed to have just realized, hurriedly withdrawing his wand, simultaneously cursing inwardly. Doesn't the old bat make any noise when walking? If he hadn't reacted quickly, the wand would have flashed not red, but a different light. Stunning spell. Snape raised an eyebrow, staring meaningfully at William, who was glancing around. It's something I read in a charm book, Professor. I was just trying it out. Due to Snape's interruption, William lost his view of the previously seen ancient magic, but he didn't react much, considering the age of that red-haired little girl holding the book. She should also go to Hogwarts this year, so he planned to pay attention to it then. He refocused his attention back onto Snape. He could tell this professor seemed to be suspicious of him. No surprise, as it was supposedly his first time handling a wand today, and his performance had been a bit too practiced. Charm book, all right, Mr. Richard, just like Dumbledore said, maybe you really are extraordinarily talented. Snape's tone was utterly mocking. He looked down at William, his dark eyes seemingly able to penetrate one's soul. I learn things quickly, Professor. William nodded confidently, a truth he wasn't lying about. He never required more than one try to learn a charm. Really? We'll have to wait and see, Snape said noncommittally, tilting his head slightly to hide his gaze. Legilimency found nothing unusual. Snape frowned slightly in confusion, wondering if he had misjudged. You should be buying your textbooks now, Mr. Richard. Snape turned toward the entrance of Flourish and Blots, where Gilderoy Lockhart was continuing his book signing, with not many textbooks left beside him. Quickly now, maybe you'll snag a signed set. He finished this sentence with a sarcastic grin. I'll settle for the original version. Watching the queue clearly outnumbering the remaining books before Lockhart, William turned and walked in another direction. Was that Snape? Having walked to the other side of Diagon Alley with the Weasleys, Harry turned back, looking toward Flourish and Blots. Who's that with him? Harry, you can't recognize everyone from Hogwarts, Ron said. He might not even be a Hogwarts student. No, my silly brother, that person is indeed part of Hogwarts. A skinny red-haired boy suddenly draped an arm over Ron's shoulders, speaking ruefully. Dear little Ronnie, I thought you were just dense, didn't expect your memory not to fare any better. As he spoke, the boy showed a sad expression, making Ron feel as though not recognizing the person by Snape's side was a grave sin. Stop teasing him, Fred. Another red-haired boy wearing a prefect badge marked with A. P. leaned over, looking at Harry. That person is a transfer student, a fifth-year transfer. A fifth-year transfer. How's that even possible? Harry opened his eyes wide, showing an expression of surprise. But it's true. Lee Jordan always brings credible news, and Fred switched the conversation to the prefect. I'm George, Percy. Yes, I'm Fred. A boy identical to George peeked over. Hagrid, is that person really a fifth-year transfer student? Harry turned to Hagrid. Even though he was just the gamekeeper, he should know some bits of information. If he's with Professor Snape, Hagrid mumbled in a barely audible voice for Harry, then he likely is. Professor McGonagall assigned Professor Snape to guide the transfer students. Even though Hagrid had some grievances about the arrangement, as he heard Professor McGonagall didn't hesitate at all in deciding between him and Snape for guiding duties. But that's not surprising, is it? As expected, Professor Snape did not complete his guiding duties. In the half-month after returning from Diagon Alley, he only visited Privet Drive twice to see William. After teaching him some basic spells and reciting some common knowledge of the magic realm, he never showed up again. This formed a stark contrast with Professor Figo, who was solely responsible for guiding William a century ago and was extremely dedicated, which also caused William to have strong doubts about the current teaching quality at Hogwarts. However, that didn't matter. He didn't think these professors could teach him anything anyway. He just hoped that no troublemaking third-generation Black Demon King would pop up in the coming years. During this period, William caught up on the history of the past century, including Grindelwald's revolution and Voldemort's terror attacks. Indeed, wizards cannot escape the human realm. When the external environment, Goblin Rebellion pacification, becomes stable, someone will inevitably start seeking thrills internally. But this period of catching up led him to discover something interesting, like how in 1892 when he graduated, the current headmaster Albus Dumbledore enrolled, meaning he almost became the defense against the dark arts professor to the current Hogwarts headmaster. However, speaking about it now is pointless, as William has already boarded the Hogwarts Express. He found an empty compartment and sat down with his brown leather suitcase, watching the scenery speed by outside as he sighed somewhat wistfully. Wait, what's that? Seeing the turquoise-green car flying through the sky from the window, William blinked in confusion. This thing looked somewhat familiar. Oh, he saw this car hovering outside the second-story window of 4 Privet Drive on the night he received Hogwarts' letter, but why is it appearing now? William waved his hand in the air, making the world clearer in his eyes. Upon concentrating, he finally recognized the two heads in the front seats of the car, one red and one black. The black one was Harry Potter. After making this surprising discovery, William knowingly nodded. People say he's the protagonist. Even going to school is unique compared to others. If he's not the protagonist, who else could be? Whoa. Just as William lifted the magic, the originally closed compartment door suddenly burst open from outside, and a fluffy brown-haired head appeared at the entrance. The girl leaned on the door frame and looked at William sitting inside, bluntly asking, "Have you seen Ha?" The girl's voice suddenly halted, and she stared at William's face for a long moment, showing a surprised expression. Wait, are you the transfer student George mentioned? That's me. Who are you? William immediately recognized the girl in front of him. After all, the two prominent front teeth were the most noticeable feature. She was the girl standing next to Harry Potter at Flourish and Blotts that day, though he still didn't know her name. I'm Hermione Granger. Hermione stepped into the compartment, as she blocked the corridor where a trolley filled with snacks was being pushed, then extended her right hand to William. William Richard. Are you really a fifth year? William shook hands with her briefly, then interrupted the girl who seemed to want to ask something, continuing, so, what were you going to ask earlier? Is it related to Harry Potter? Ah, Hermione hurriedly patted her head. I almost forgot. Have you seen Harry and Ron? Ron Weasley, a red-haired second-year boy. I've searched the entire train and couldn't find them. If you could find them, that'd be odd. William lifted his hand to interrupt Hermione's rapid-fire questions, indicating he understood, then he pointed outside the window. Hermione stared at the blue sky outside the window, blinking in confusion. You won't believe this, but I just saw the two of them outside the window, driving a sedan flying through the sky. Wait. What? The incredibly sharp shout almost shattered William's eardrums. Are you saying they're driving a car flying in the sky, and it's just the two of them? Hermione leaned on the table in front of William, her deep brown eyes staring wide in anticipation of a denial from him. Yes, it's just the two of them. Unfortunately, things won't go as wished, William confirmed with a nod and added, and it's unlicensed driving. I remember a London driver's license requires being 17. I need to tell Percy. Hurry and have him contact the professors. Hermione clearly couldn't hear the latter half of William's words anymore. She opened the compartment door and hurriedly thanked William while muttering, "This is too chaotic," as she ran towards the back of the train. But she forgot to close the door. Just as William was about to wave the compartment door shut, another figure appeared at the door. "Hello, is there any space here?" The girl looked quite young, seemingly a new student, and she spoke with a somewhat elusive tone. Her long, dark golden brown hair was messy and dirty, falling down to her waist. Her eyebrows were so light they were almost invisible, and her eye sockets bulged slightly. Her silver pupils seemed to have a layer of mist as she asked the only occupant in the compartment. "There is." Seeing the girl walk into the compartment by herself, William nodded. "My name is Luna, Luna Lovegood." The girl sat across from William, raised her hand to tidy the hair on both sides of her cheeks, revealing a pair of carrot earrings hidden underneath. "William Richard. I know you, you're the one they've been talking about, the fifth-year transfer student." Luna seemed to remember something happy, and her lips curved slightly upward, "But we're actually all new students, aren't we?" "Maybe." William shrugged. He couldn't possibly say that he had actually attended Hogwarts for 3 years 100 years ago and now was coming back for 3. Wait, did he suddenly realize that even though he attended twice, he didn't actually complete 7 years? And before Luna could say anything else, the compartment door, which had just been closed, was opened again from outside. Tisk! Don't kids knock on doors nowadays? William turned his head with a bit of helplessness toward the door, and a red-haired boy walked in, followed by Hermione. "Did you just see Harry Potter and Ron?" The boy sounded a bit impatient as he sat next to William, eagerly asking. "And you are?" William noticed the boy's hair color. The one probably driving without a license was likely his relative. Anyway, as long as they're pure-blood wizards, they could almost all be related. After all, the British Isles are only so large. Percy Weasley, Gryffindor Prefect, 6th year. When introducing himself, his speaking speed suddenly slowed down. "When did you see those two?" "Just before Miss Granger last pushed the door open." "Thanks." Percy stood up somewhat irritably, heading for the door. "I need to write to Professor McGonagall. Those two are definitely going to cause Gryffindor to lose a lot of points." "Sorry." Hermione quickly caught up with Percy's pace. She also wanted to write to Professor McGonagall, but she was more concerned about Harry and Ron's safety. Flying all the way from London to Hogwarts in a flying car. She could even imagine Harry and Ron crashing headfirst into a tower. He's been caught by a Raxpert, that Gryffindor prefect. Luna watched the two's departing figures with her elusive gaze. William kept silent, though he was indeed curious about what a Raxpert was, but an instinct told him, don't ask. After those two left, the compartment door wasn't opened again by anyone else, except for a Gryffindor student searching for a toad. Luna quietly held a magazine called The Quibbler, the exaggerated cover hiding her entire face. However, William wondered if she was really reading it, considering she had only turned 2 pages from noon to evening, and even the pages were upside down. As for William, aside from spending 5 sickles on chocolate frogs and pumpkin pasties when the snack trolley passed by, he spent the rest of his attention entirely on Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, borrowed from Luna. This textbook was much more interesting than those from 100 years ago. His books had already been sent ahead to the castle, except for a pile of Lockhart's. Without realizing it, night fell, and William looked up at the window as the silhouette of the castle slowly emerged in the night. The train will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train, and we will transport it to the school for you. A voice echoed throughout the train. Woo! Thick white smoke billowed out of the train's chimney, and outside, the Black Mountains gradually became distinct. New students. First-year students come over here. And you, the 5th-year transfer student, you should come as well. In the cold night, a bright kerosene lamp swayed above the little wizards' heads. William immediately recognized the giant holding the lamp, whose 11-foot height nearly reached the station's ceiling, Upon hearing the call, he pushed through the crowd to approach. You're the transfer student, William. At that moment, Hagrid was already surrounded by a chattering group of first-year students, but he still noticed William on the outermost edge. After all, William was quite conspicuous among a bunch of kids who only reached his thigh, since he was over 1.7 meters tall. William Richard, sir. Oh, I'm the keeper of keys at Hogwarts, Rubeus Hagrid. Hagrid scratched his messy long hair on his head. Professor McGonagall told me, she said you have to cross the Black Lake by boat too because it's a tradition that every new student at Hogwarts must experience. Tradition. Some Headmaster Blake from 100 years ago certainly didn't think that far. William merely nodded politely on the surface, while inwardly he began silently criticizing some middle-aged man from 100 years ago. At this time, he still had a piece of pineapple jam in his mouth, so he didn't say much. Come on, follow me. Are there any other new students? Watch your step, everyone, alright. Now, new students, follow me. Hagrid called out as he walked into the darkness, and a group of dark heads followed the only source of light into a steep and muddy path. The shadows of the trees on both sides of the narrow path seemed sinister at first glance, causing the little wizards to instinctively huddle toward the center of the road. Ah! Amidst the pushing and shoving, a cry of surprise rang out as a small red figure darted past William, causing him to instinctively reach out and grab. Ah! A cry even more miserable than before pierced everyone's eardrums. Lumos, luminous sparkle. A redwood wand appeared in William's right hand, and as the dazzling white light lit up, he saw the source of the cry. At that moment, his right hand was clutching a mass of fiery red hair, which was attached to a girl who had fallen to the ground. She was using all her strength to hold onto William's right hand, probably to make her head hurt less. Are you okay? Luna, who had been walking beside William, came over and rescued the girl from his grasp. I'm fine. The girl in a slightly worn-out robe took a deep breath and stood up with Luna's help. Thank you, both. She looked at them gratefully. Is this the little girl from the Weasley family? William instinctively looked to the girl's side but didn't see any traces of ancient magic. All the students' luggage had been left on the train. Is everything okay back there? Having already reached the bottom of the slope, Hagrid turned around and asked loudly. William waved his hand at Hagrid, indicating that there was no problem. He didn't put away his wand. At that moment, he was like a firefly in the dark, and the nearby little wizards instinctively gathered toward the light. At the end of the narrow path, a black lake suddenly unfolded. On the high slope across the lake stood a towering castle with numerous spires, each window twinkling under the starry sky. No more than 4 per boat. Hagrid pointed to a row of boats docked by the shore. William occupied one end of one of the boats. Luna and the red-headed girl named Ginny Weasley also sat on it. Just like Hagrid occupying one small boat on his own, William was practically 2 in 1 among this group of little wizards. The boat glided across the calm, mirror-like surface of the Black Lake, and the early autumn night breeze rustled the hems of the wizard robes. William gazed at the gigantic castle not far away, a place both familiar and unfamiliar, lost in thought. What is that? In the midst of the silent solitude, Luna looked up at the sky. That's my dad's car. Ginny exclaimed in horror. Following the direction of their gaze, William turned around. Unsurprisingly, a teal-green car was heading straight for the lake, its headlights flashing on and off, indicating it wasn't in good shape. Get out of the way. A boy's voice of alarm came from inside the car. Ron felt like his throat was about to burst from yelling, and he stomped hard on the brake, but the fool thing seemed to have completely failed a few minutes ago. That's Ginny. Bouncing around, Harry was on the verge of throwing up. He managed to stick his head out from the passenger seat and noticed the fiery red hair on the boat. I see it, Harry, but. Ron's face turned deathly pale as he deeply regretted the reckless decision they had made. Getting expelled from Hogwarts for tardiness would have been better than crashing into the lake with Harry and dragging his sister down with them. Impedimenta. Barrier. Arresto momentum. Deceleration stop. Protega totalum. Total protection. Seeing the car heading straight toward him, despite the vastness of the Black Lake, William waved his arm. Several spells flew from the tip of his wand, and the car's flying speed rapidly decreased, finally stopping 9 feet away from William, suspended in midair. Hey, Ginny, and everyone, good evening. Ron, still in a state of shock, didn't dare lift his foot off the brake. He awkwardly looked at the pale-faced girl on the boat, and the other two, seemingly wanting to say something, but Newton clearly wouldn't give him that much time. Crack. The car's engine made an ominous sound, and the next moment, the whole vehicle plummeted into the lake. Wingardium Leviosa, levitation charm. With a wave and flick of William's wand, two soaked figures were pulled out of the lake. Cough cough. Looking utterly disheveled, Harry spat out the lake water he had swallowed. He grabbed the round frame glasses hooked on his collar. Hedwig, she's still in the cage. Accio cage. The iron birdcage burst out of the water and fell into William's hands. A thoroughly soaked white owl burst through the loosened cage door and fluttered onto Luna's head. It cocked its head and began preening its feathers, completely ignoring Harry's nearby apologies. True coldness often isn't about loud quarrels. Splash. The next moment, a giant tentacle broke through the lake's surface, pushing a pile of luggage onto the water. The tip of the tentacle gave a wave before disappearing, as if greeting the little wizards. Luna suddenly seemed excited and waved vigorously. Hey, what happened? Hagrid's small boat swayed over slowly. He looked at Harry and Ron floating on the water, his face hidden by his beard full of shock. Harry, how did you? Hagrid. Harry lowered his head in embarrassment. In his and Ron's original plan, they would have landed the flying car steadily on the flat ground in front of the castle. Excepting Draco Malfoy's, Ron would have preferred George and Fred's envious gazes. But now, not only did he almost kill Ginny, but he also almost lost all their luggage. Looking at the small boats gathering around, Harry painfully closed his eyes. All right, let's not talk about this now. William, please take them both. Hagrid reached out and took the two drenched little wizards, placing them on his boat. The waterline of the boat noticeably rose again. We're not far from the shore, we should pick up the pace. The boats passed through a stone tunnel and docked at a place resembling an underground dock. On the dim dock, two figures stood side by side at the edge of the stone platform. Severus Snape. William immediately recognized the greasy hair reflecting some light from the oil lamp, but for some reason, he felt that Snape seemed to be in an unusually good mood today. Professor McGonagall. And Professor Snape. Hagrid mumbled as he stepped off the boat, still holding Harry and Ron by the back of their collars. Ha! Let's see who this is. Harry, Potter, and the boy from the Weasley family. Snape's sallow face bore a hint of a hidden, excited smile. He ignored everyone else, directly snatching the pair from Hagrid's grasp, pulling them swiftly toward the castle without a care for the other little wizards present. You'll be expelled for this mess. You won't be saved even by Dumbledore, I'm telling you. Oh, he was in a really good mood. Having often seen the other party's sour expression last month, William nodded. It seemed Snape was indeed one of the antagonists in the book, Harry Potter. After all, what kind-hearted person would smile so wickedly at the news of the protagonist's impending expulsion? Hagrid. Standing beside Snape, Professor McGonagall didn't turn around. She only spoke to Hagrid once all the little wizards had stepped onto the dock. Professor McGonagall, just now Harry and Ron. Hagrid looked at the backs of the two who had been taken away by Snape, anxiously trying to explain for them. We all saw that car. Hagrid. Professor McGonagall shook her head, her lips pressed into a tight line. Dumbledore will make a fair judgment, but right now, I need to know what exactly happened just now. 10 minutes ago, she and Snape were standing on the square in front of the Hogwarts Great Hall, waiting for the flying car mentioned in Percy's letter. Originally she was supposed to be alone, but upon learning Harry Potter was in that car, Snape was uncontrollably excited. Originally the newly arrived Defense Against the Dark Arts class professor also wanted to come over, but she persuaded him to stay back. However, contrary to their expectations, the car did not fly toward the castle but plummeted straight towards the boats filled with little wizards in the Black Lake upon appearing on the horizon. Just as McGonagall had summoned a broomstick and flown into the air, the car dropped directly into the lake. Once she noticed the two had been rescued, McGonagall's heart, which had jumped into her throat, settled back down reluctantly. Thanks to Professor Snape, he taught me quite a few charms over the summer. Noticing Hagrid instinctively cast his gaze his way, William felt a bit helpless but had to offer an explanation. He didn't want to take center stage. But nearly having a car incident while sitting in a boat was already magical enough. So he opted to first extricate himself, considering he was entering fifth year, even though on the surface, he was a new student only exposed to magic for half a month. If he could proficiently wield so much magic on his own, it was beyond talent. Luckily, at the time only Luna and Ginny, who were on the boat with him, saw him casting spells, or perhaps the two in the car as well. At the moment, Luna and Ginny, one was silent, helping groom the feathers of the owl in her arms, while the other was doing the same for someone else's owl, neither intending to say anything. So I used a cushioning charm and levitating spells to save them. William continued explaining to McGonagall, but my mana wasn't enough, I couldn't save their luggage or the car they came in. It's okay, Mr. Richard, you've done a great job. Professor McGonagall's tight lips relaxed slightly, she seemingly wanted to smile, but her heavy heart made her abandon the idea. Without you, the situation would have been worse. A lot of people owe you thanks, such as. Speaking, she glanced at the red-haired girl behind William, for example, Mr. Weasley. Without waiting for William to respond, Professor McGonagall turned around, raising her right hand. The tip of her wand lit up. New students, follow me, Hagrid, you've done enough, leave it to me from here. Hagrid naturally had no objections, and the little wizards followed Professor McGonagall, through a tunnel in the rocky terrain, to a massive oak door. She pulled the door wide open, and the group entered a spacious hall, bypassing the marble staircase leading upward. They stopped before a set of double doors along the stone-paved floor. The buzz of chatter beyond the doors filled every ear. Welcome to Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall turned around to introduce Hogwarts and the sorting ceremony to the new students. After a lengthy introduction, she looked at William, as for Mr. Richard, your sorting ceremony will be last. It's a bit late, we'll start the sorting ceremony immediately. As she spoke, Professor McGonagall reached out to push open the doors behind her, and the noise exploded into the hall. Behind the doors was the Hogwarts Great Hall. William stood at the end of the line, observing the hall that hadn't changed much in decoration over 100 years. White candles still floated in midair, deep gray clouds hung low, and students from 4 houses were gathered around 4 long tables, laden with gleaming plates and goblets. The students were now staring at the new student lineup from the entry hall. With no doubt, William was the most eye-catching among this batch of new students. Professor McGonagall quickly stepped up the hall's stone steps, standing beside a tattered hat, a shabby hat covered in patches, which first-year little wizards were nervously eyeing. The next moment, the hat suddenly began to sing. William's eyebrow twitched. Not. After 100 years, this hat still had new lyrics. Once the sorting hat finished its song, Professor McGonagall moved a step forward with a list in her hand. Claude Avery. A short boy with glasses stepped onto the stage. Slytherin. Almost the instant the hat touched the boy's head, it loudly shouted out. Luna Lovegood. Luna walked out of the line as if sleepwalking. Ravenclaw. Ginny Weasley. The girl tossed her fiery red hair as she went up. Gryffindor. Finally, after the last little wizard took a seat at the Ravenclaw table, Professor McGonagall cleared her throat at last. William Richard. Almost all eyes in the hall turned towards William. After all, a 5th grade transfer student was extremely rare at Hogwarts, at least not seen for nearly 100 years. These gazes included all the professors seated at the staff table. However, Snape was not in the hall. Instead, William saw Gilderoy Lockhart, whom he had encountered in Diagon Alley, sitting next to a short elf professor watching him with a smile. For some reason, William detected a hint of enthusiasm in his gaze. Do we know each other? He also noticed the current headmaster of Hogwarts, an elderly man who seemed somewhat playful. The way he sneakily popped toffee into his mouth suggested someone might be keeping watch. Acknowledging William's gaze, he playfully winked at him. The first-year little wizards who had just been sorted had already spread word of William's deeds on the Black Lake, so as William sat on the 4-legged stool, the entire hall fell into a brief silence. Holding the sorting hat, William took a deep breath. Sorting was a skill. It determined his path from dormitory to hall to library for the next 3 years. To avoid getting lost in the castle like before, he had prepared a set of arguments. But the hat did not ask him a barrage of questions as he had anticipated. After a prolonged silence, a faint voice tinged with curiosity whispered in his ear. Child, have I met you before? Why does a hat need such a good memory? Ahem, I think you might have remembered wrong. William had to admit that this was the most panicked moment in the 2 months since he crossed over again. It was mainly because he was completely unprepared for this situation to occur, much like 100 years ago when he was hit off a carriage by a flying dragon on his way to school. Totally unexpected. No, I am the Hat of Gryffindor, filled with wisdom by the 4 founders of Hogwarts themselves. I can't be wrong. That voice seemed offended, shouting sharply, "Let me think about who you are. I am sure you've warned me." This time William didn't get to answer before the Sorting Hat shouted excitedly, "I've remembered, William Richard, the 5th-year transfer student. Although your appearance has changed a bit, your soul." The Sorting Hat seemed to take a deep breath. "That scent, I remember you. You've come back." "No, Mr. Sorting Hat, I think you must be mistaken." Having calmed down, William simply shook his head and denied calmly. From the moment he received the acceptance letter, he had slightly altered his appearance using ancient magic. The Hogwarts castle is full of living, old things, any ghost might recognize him. But now that his identity had been revealed, well, the fingertips hidden under William's wizard robe glowed deep blue. "Don't panic, it's not a big problem." "HMPH, is that so, sly little Ravenclaw brat?" The Sorting Hat snorted and continued, "Then I won't change my decision, so still, raw. Okay, this is a big problem. The Ravenclaw common room is at the very top of the Ravenclaw tower. He's naturally terrible with directions, and in a mere 3 years, he's gotten lost in the castle more than 150 times, and now they want him to continue climbing the moving staircases for 3 more years. Definitely impossible." William's right hand, hidden under his wizard robe, shook gently, and the deep blue light flashed at his fingertips. Normally a Confundus charm wouldn't affect a high-level magical creation like the Sorting Hat, but William's magical cheat, ancient magic, could work wonders in situations like this. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw alike are in towers, while Slytherin's common room is too humid. "Then, it's decided to be you. Hufflepuff." After a brief pause, the long table on the far left of the hall, from the direction of the professor's seats, erupted in cheers. The Hufflepuff students rhythmically beat the table, while 2 red-haired boys at the Gryffindor long table let out a big sigh. Last year Gryffindor got the savior, and if there was another transfer student this year it would be perfect. "All right, Professor." William rose and returned the Sorting Hat to Professor McGonagall, who smiled at him before carrying the slightly limp hat toward the professor's seat. She didn't notice. William nodded in satisfaction, and then he saw the headmaster wink at him again. "Does he have eye problems?" Muttering silently in his heart, William turned, smiled, and walked steadily toward the Hufflepuff long table. The enthusiastic little badgers had already made room for him, with an empty seat to the left beside a boy who smiled very friendly. This matched William's stereotypical impression of Hufflepuffs. "Hello, I'm Cedric Diggory, 4th year this year." The boy extended his hand to William. "Welcome to Hufflepuff." William Richard. William couldn't quite remember how many times he had introduced himself today. 5th year. "I heard you saved Harry Potter on the Black Lake." The boy's eyes were excited, and others at the long table also looked over simultaneously. It seemed first-year Hufflepuff students couldn't keep quiet. "That's just luck, pure luck." William embraced Hufflepuff's kind virtue, humility. Professor McGonagall promptly left the hall after the sorting ceremony, and Dumbledore took the stage at the owl podium before the professor's seats after she left. Under the watchful eyes of the students, a pack of hungry wolves, he didn't say much, simply introducing the new Professor Lockhart and reminding students that entering the Forbidden Forest was prohibited, before raising his arm abruptly. "Now, let us eat." There was steamed lamb, steamed bear paws, steamed deer tails, roasted duck, roast chick. Countless foods nearly filled the entire dining table, and William took a deep breath. Thankfully the headmaster wasn't like Black, who always gave long and tedious speeches before mealtime. Although his eyes were still on Dumbledore's departing figure, William's mouth already had a piece of sliced pork chop. Food is truly the most wonderful thing in the world. Having been hungry halfway through, with nothing more than train lunch to eat, William felt genuine gratitude. Dumbledore soon returned to the hall, accompanied by McGonagall and Snape. However, Snape's expression was much darker compared to when William saw him at the underground port before. It even reached the level of when William had asked Snape to wash his hair. "Looks like Harry Potter wasn't expelled." "How do you know?" The one speaking was a second-year girl sitting to the right of William, Hannah Abbott. Because of Snape's expression, everyone knows he dislikes Harry Potter. Across from William, Ernie Macmillan interjected, using his freckled nose to point to Snape, who had a sour face and was staring at the table. If Harry Potter had been expelled, the old bat spirit would be as thrilled as if today were Christmas. William nodded, indicating that was exactly what he meant. The feast eventually ended, and Hufflepuff's boy prefect Truman stood up to lead the new students out of the hall, but just as William stood up to follow, his arm was suddenly grabbed from behind. William turned around, and the students standing around him had unknowingly parted. Seeing William turn, Snape released his right hand. "Come with me." Snape didn't explain, his mood clearly hadn't improved despite the passage of time. He still had a sour expression, his black cloak lightly fluttering behind him as he moved, as if entering an uninhabited realm through a crowd of students. After all, including some Slytherin students, nearly everyone avoided walking too close to him. Taking advantage of the path Snape cleared, William proceeded unimpeded up the stairs, turning corners that left him hopelessly lost, until the two stopped before an ugly gargoyle statue. The headmaster's office. William recognized this statue. Pineapple jam. Snape cleared his throat, and with his words, the grotesque creature suddenly sprang to life and jumped aside, its wall splitting into two halves. Behind the wall was a spiral staircase, which Snape and William ascended together. With a rumbling sound, they soon paused in front of a gleaming oak door, adorned with a brass knocker shaped like a griffin. Snape opened the wooden door, and together they entered a spacious, beautiful circular room. Portraits of former headmasters, male and female, hung on the walls, each lightly snoring within their frames. Not surprisingly, William recognized an old acquaintance, Headmaster Black, resting peacefully in a portrait. However, he did not see Professor Fitzgerald, the only one of the four ancient magic guardians who had served as a headmaster. Her frame was empty. The room also contained a great table, its legs shaped like claws. On a shelf behind the table sat a bedraggled, crumpled wizard hat, the Sorting Hat. "Don't touch anything." Seeing William head towards the back of the table, Snape impatiently warned. But William acted as if he hadn't heard, grabbing the Sorting Hat once more and placing it upon his head. "Kid, why are you here again?" A weak whisper echoed in William's ear. "Good evening, Mr. Sorting Hat." Listening to that listless voice, William greeted cheerfully. "Who told you to want to sort me into Ravenclaw? Not the one getting lost climbing stairs in the castle." "Kid, this is serious." The Sorting Hat's voice became a bit deep, but it seemed to get more and more indignant. "You actually dared to cast a spell on the great, fearless, wise, and brave Hat of Gryffindor. This is simply outrageous. Half of those weren't even your adjectives, were they? Mr. Hat, I don't think Professor Dumbledore would necessarily believe an accusation made by a patched, and even adjective-less hat against a brilliant Hogwarts student." William said sincerely, though only in his mind, since Snape was still staring at him intensely from behind. Though he didn't step forward to stop him, maybe he was waiting for Dumbledore to come back so he could show the old man just how unruly William was. "Brilliant student," the Sorting Hat loudly repeated, as if William had just told a huge joke. "Oh, come on, kid, I remember clearly." It continued, "You ended the Goblin Rebellion, defeated the Black Wizard clan, stopped poachers from harming magical creatures in the Forbidden Forest, won the battle to defend Hogwarts, and even," the Sorting Hat's voice grew quieter. "I'm listening," reminded William, who hadn't heard enough. But you actually do seem to be a good student," the Sorting Hat mumbled, a bit confused. "Now you understand." William smiled. The effect of the charm clearly hadn't worn off. This hat had muddled itself up. None of the mentioned achievements had anything to do with the word student. "But that doesn't justify you cursing me." The Sorting Hat quickly shook its brim and said angrily. "I apologize to you, the great, fearless, wise, and brave Hat of Gryffindor," William said sincerely. That's better." The hat was momentarily stunned, muttering as it softened, then curiously asked, "So how did you do it? I mean, show up after 100 years. And you're so small." The hat picked an adjective, although not quite fitting. In the wizarding world, people over 100 years old are not uncommon, but William's situation was indeed unprecedented for it. At least the Sorting Hat hadn't heard of it. "I'm puzzled too. I almost became Dumbledore's teacher. William shook his head, not minding sharing this with the hat. After all, this hat is a legitimate, old thing, what if it had come across something similar? But, hat, I have a reason to stay at Hogwarts. Related to the thing underground at Hogwarts, right? Half and half, though William certainly didn't say that, he just nodded solemnly. All right, I promise you, I suppose I won't tell Dumbledore, the Sorting Hat muttered, agreeing with William. At that moment, the office door was pushed open from the outside, and Dumbledore walked in, dressed in a moon-white robe, with a crooked maroon hat atop his head, and a silver-white beard draping to his waist. But the most attention-grabbing thing about the old man wasn't his attire, nor his crooked nose, but his shoulder. On Dumbledore's shoulder stood a rather unusual-looking bird. Phoenix. Looking at the ugly bird with remnants of golden-red feathers, William quickly recalled this magical creature. Fox is about to enter her nirvana. I thought I'd take her out for some fresh air. By the way, she's a phoenix. The old man placed the phoenix on the stand behind the door, turned to look at the top of William's head. It seems you and the Sorting Hat are getting along well. Of course, Professor Dumbledore. William nodded, taking off the Sorting Hat from his head and placing it back on the stand. The hat lightly twisted its body, and its brim flopped down softly. Sit down, William. Oh, please allow me to call you that. Dumbledore sat in the high-backed chair behind the desk. Then he waved his hand, and two nearby stools on the bookshelf suddenly lifted their legs and hurriedly ran to the middle of the office. William followed suit and sat down, while Snape remained motionless, still leaning against the wall. I apologize for calling you here so late, William. Professor Snape is curious about some of your actions and suggested talking to you face to face. Dumbledore sighed, showing a helpless expression on his face. It's an accusation, Professor. Dissatisfied with Dumbledore's rather gentle wording, Snape stepped forward a few steps, taking over the conversation as he stared intensely. The spells you cast earlier tonight on the Black Lake. He leaned forward, staring hard into William's eyes. I have not taught you these, and this is absolutely not the ability a newcomer who just entered the world of magic after living in the Muggle world should possess. Even many sixth-year students cannot master these spells proficiently. Of course, Snape didn't say the latter half of the sentence because that seemed to admit Hogwarts' education level was lousy. Didn't teach me. William chuckled. So is Professor Snape now admitting that he wasn't serious enough about guiding my preschool education during summer break, neglecting his duty for the Ministry of Magic? William emphasized the latter part of the sentence. Never fall into the trap of self-validation. As for why Snape would be so clearly aware of the situation on the lake's surface, William calmly met Snape's gaze and guessed the answer. Just like at the bookstore entrance in Diagon Alley, Snape is definitely a powerful legilimens. And half an hour ago, he was with the two students on the train for a long time. Obviously, either Harry or Ron had seen William's spellcasting process clearly. Snape was obviously stuck by William's question, and he even forgot to specify the details of the accusation. Although these spells are not within the scope of preschool education, in the Ministry of Magic's task, the accompanying professor is responsible for teaching and also for safely bringing transfer students to Hogwarts Castle. For some reason, he only threw William a schedule of the Hogwarts Express. He indeed neglected his duty. I think perhaps Professor Snape was delayed by something important. Dumbledore suddenly spoke up to bail Snape out, bringing the topic back. I think, maybe you could also answer Severus's question. William turned his head, locking eyes with Dumbledore, but without the slightest panic, nodded, although Professor Snape didn't fulfill his duty. He emphasized again. Snape's face turned greener. Because of my curiosity for magic, I frequently went to Diagon Alley during the last half of my summer break. This is true, he indeed frequented Diagon Alley. And perhaps because I have some talent in magic, I quickly mastered many spells from the charm books. This is also true, he learns charms like finding extra points in Deep Blue. Most of these spells were self-taught from charm books, except for the levitating spell. He looked up at Snape, which was taught by a professor. He didn't specify which professor, so this part was true too. That's impossible, huh? Talent, clearly, Snape scoffed at William's explanation. Are you jealous of me because you lack talent, neglectful professor? William took advantage of the situation to emphasize and repeat the question, once again stumping Snape. All right, Severus, that's enough. Dumbledore interrupted Snape's rebuttal, shaking his head, his silver beard slightly quivering. William has already given his answer. I think your doubts should have been resolved. But, Dumbledore, you promised. Enough, Severus. I believe William has no issues. Dumbledore repeated. His firm stance surprised William a bit, as he expected Dumbledore would continue to side with the professor, which was reasonable, just like the former headmaster Blake. He even prepared for what to say next, but now it seems this headmaster knows what's what. Thinking this, William glanced at the painting frame beside him with Headmaster Blake, who always kept his eyes closed. Alas, comparing goods is indeed unsatisfactory. However, it's normal for him to be suspected. A Muggle-born little wizard who's lived in the Muggle world until 15 without touching the magic world but can cast some very advanced spells is indeed strange. Of course, the key point is, Professor Snape seems very concerned about his hair. And William attacked his hair at the first meeting. Sorry about tonight, William, Dumbledore said. Professor Snape will safely escort you back to the Hufflepuff common room. I presume I'm right, Severus. After a long silence, Snape reluctantly grunted. Today is your first day at Hogwarts. I wish you a wonderful evening. The elder responded with a playful wink of his pale blue eyes to William. This old man's eyes are definitely faulty. William followed Snape out of the headmaster's office and nodded with certainty. As expected, Snape only delivered William to the first-floor hall. After telling William the location of the Hufflepuff common room and the way to enter, he quickly left along the staircase on the other side of the hall, heading towards the direction of the Slytherin dungeon and the potions classroom. He didn't care if William might be stuck outside the common room due to entering the wrong command. Quite the opposite, he was looking forward to such a thing happening. Snape didn't engage in any further conversation with William on the way, leaving only a parting remark. I'll be watching you, Richard, he said with his lips tightly pressed. William always felt that Snape held a grudge ever since their first meeting on Privet Drive, when William suggested he wash his hair first. The corridor was deserted at midnight, but the air was filled with whispering sounds, as the portraits lining the corridor were watching William. They rarely saw a little wizard roaming so boldly at night. William walked down the corridor and soon saw several large barrels stacked on a dark stone trough to his right. He drew his magic wand and tapped the lids of the middle two barrels in the second row to the rhythm of Helga Hufflepuff. Soon, the lid swung open, revealing a door just big enough for a person to pass through. The circular common room was empty at the moment, warm flames flickering in the burning fireplace, and there were many yellow and black stitched soft sofas arranged in the empty space of the room. William crossed the hall, following the directions given by Prefect Truman before Snape took him away. Hoping he hadn't gotten it wrong. But luck was on his side, as he quickly found his suitcase in a dormitory with 5 beds, but no occupants. It seemed luck was on his side. He had been assigned to a room all to himself. Staring at the suitcase in the corner for a while, William sat down but then stood up again. Oops, he just remembered he hadn't fed his wolf yet. Where was the kitchen again? Stealing a car and almost getting Harry and Ginny killed. I don't know why they haven't expelled you, just wait until I deal with you. You don't know how ashamed we were when we received a letter from Dumbledore yesterday. So infuriating, your father will be under review at work, and it's all your fault. If you don't follow the rules, we'll take you back immediately. Early on the second day of school, a scarlet howler exploded above the Gryffindor table in the Great Hall, soon prompting the two culprits to leave the hall with their heads hung low. Behind them was a girl carrying a thick book, lecturing them, judging by the expression of impatience on the red-haired boy's face. Your timetable, William. Prefect Truman patted William's shoulder. Normally I'd have given it to you last night, but you were called away by Professor Dumbledore. Thanks. William brushed off the sugar frosting from his fingers. His mouth was still stuffed with half a donut, and reached out to take the timetable. Because he hadn't experienced elective choices in the 3rd year and given the heavy study workload in the 5th year, Professor McGonagall agreed to William's request to only keep magical creatures, ancient runes, and Muggle studies as electives. Of course, he couldn't skip mandatory classes like potions, transfiguration, and defense against the dark arts. For instance, he now had to clutch a copy of Intermediate Transfiguration Technique and find his way to the Transfiguration classroom. Luckily, both the Great Hall and the Transfiguration classroom were on the first floor, so as long as those pesky rotating staircases weren't involved, William could usually find the right destination on time. All right, put everything away. William had just found an empty seat when Professor McGonagall quickly walked to the podium from the back of the classroom. Today we will start learning the vanishing spell. This is a difficult point in the OWL exams, and you have a whole term to practice. She said this, supporting herself on the desk, her sharp eyes behind oval glasses sweeping over everyone present. However, you only have one term. Therefore, she extended her tone. I don't want anyone causing trouble in my class. Does everyone understand? Understood. The response wasn't very unified but still managed to make Professor McGonagall nod, and before drawing her wand, she seemed to remember something. She glanced at William sitting in the second row with slightly gentler tones. Mr. Richard, if you don't understand something, you can come to me after class. Now, she didn't wait for William's response. Everyone, open your textbooks. Fifth-year courses were so monotonous, with most teachers acting like the first 4 years hadn't been properly taught, eager to flood all this group of students' minds with knowledge as though using a sieve. The sins committed by students in the first 4 years were repaid almost entirely in this 1 year, but why? William didn't have the pleasure of 4 happy years. But fortunately, he was now experienced, disguised as a perfectly ordinary fifth-year student, intending to pass the OWL exams without a hitch, right? Merlin bless, let's hope there's no Goblin Rebellion this year, and no Dark Lord, or the Black Lake flooding. Oh, and preferably not too much homework either. Harry was starting to feel he's becoming slightly neurotic. It's only been a week since the start of the school year, and multiple times having his life philosophy discussed by Lockhart, getting pestered for photos by the first-year student Colin, and seeing Draco Malfoy's face which always made his stomach queasy. These people buzzed around him like flies, even during a weekend morning when Quidditch training was due. Thanks, Colin, but I really need to go get changed now. Harry was sure his smile was very forced, but it didn't dampen this first-year student's enthusiasm. The boy turned and rushed towards the Quidditch pitch stands not far away. I'll find a good spot, Harry. He shouted shrilly. After enduring almost an hour of motivational attrition from Captain Oliver Wood in the changing room, Harry finally grasped his Nimbus 2000 and headed onto the pitch. He wished he could ride around a few laps now, while snatching the jam-filled bread from Ron and Hermione up in the stands. But when one's luck is down, even drinking cold water feels like getting teeth stuck. At this moment, the Slytherin Quidditch team appeared on the pitch, bringing along their new seeker Draco Malfoy, and 7 Nimbus 2001 sponsored for the Slytherin Academy team by the Malfoy family. Great, all we need now is Lockhart. Harry muttered softly. Things escalated quickly beyond everyone's expectations when Malfoy uttered the term, Mudblood, in a sharp and cutting voice, causing Ron to angrily aim his magic wand at him, his fingers trembling with rage. Zeech. A faint green light shot from the tip of the wand, hitting Malfoy's chest. The boy was propelled backward, landing on the Quidditch pitch grass, with his platinum blonde hair standing on end. The loud explosive sound plunged the entire field into a momentary silence. Malfoy. Someone broke the silence and Harry looked up to see the person was apparently the captain of the Slytherin team. What was his name again? Marcus. Uck. Malfoy opened his mouth attempting to respond, but instead of speaking, he burped, causing several slugs to tumble onto his lap, shiny streams of mucus hanging down his black robes. Ha 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 ha. The Gryffindors almost burst with laughter, and Harry couldn't even straighten up. George was laughing as he toppled onto Fred, or was it Fred toppling onto George? And the culprit, Ron, after a brief moment of panic, joined them in laughter. Click. The glaring flash of a camera was the trigger, and in the next moment, someone moved first, and bright flashes of light erupted across the Quidditch pitch. Ron, he shouldn't be expelled, right? Watching the group follow Professor McGonagall out of the pitch, Hermione hesitated a bit as she spoke. Professor McGonagall appeared 3 minutes after the conflict erupted. By this time, the brawl on the Quidditch pitch was nearly at an end. Gryffindor team's Captain Oliver Wood and Marcus Flint were wrestling on the ground, and George was contemplating how to shove the stolen Nimbus 2001 into Marcus's backside. Fred seemed to have been hit by someone's tarantella curse and was running around the center of the field as if he had leg cramps. People from both house teams were sprawled all over the place, and the few left standing had long discarded their magic wands and begun fist fighting. As for the protagonist of the scuffle, Ron, he was currently tightly entwined with Malfoy, with dozens of slimy slugs crawling over their wizard robes. They were surrounded by an empty circle, clearly no one wanted to go near them. Judging by Ron's expression, he evidently didn't want to be rolling in a heap of slugs, but Malfoy seemed determined to drag him into misery, clinging to him like an octopus from behind. Ron struggled to free himself but to no avail. Harry initially wanted to jump into the fray and kick Malfoy's face hard. But instead, he reflexively pulled Colin Creevey aside to avoid two spells cast by Malfoy. To be honest, Harry hadn't expected Malfoy, in his condition, could still manage to cast spells successfully. Colin's camera smashed onto the grass, turning into a pile of scrap, as his actions of snapping photos right in Malfoy's face had greatly insulted the pampered young master, making the previous spells aimed squarely at the first-year newcomer. This served as the lighter that sparked the conflict. As for the fuse, it was undoubtedly Ron's evil curse. Why didn't Harry jump in after that? First, because Hermione held him back by the arm, and secondly, Malfoy's and Ron's disgusting state. Honestly, no one at the scene wanted to go near them. The punishment Malfoy was receiving was already sufficient, perhaps I shouldn't interfere. Having found a reason in his mind that seemed fairly reasonable, Harry felt extremely glad about his decision. Because, in the next moment, Professor McGonagall, wearing her vibrant green robes, appeared in the center of the crowd. Judging by her expression as she came down from her broomstick, someone was going to be in big trouble. Before long, using the Descendium charm to separate Malfoy and Ron, who had started to enter a state of oblivion, the livid Professor McGonagall learned the rough course of events from Wood and soon led all involved parties towards the castle. Meanwhile, Harry, Hermione, and Colin, who hadn't thrown punches, luckily escaped any punishment. Watching Ron and Malfoy's slimy backs, Harry pushed up his glasses somewhat confusedly. Although he didn't think Ron would be directly expelled, heavier sentences were inescapable, especially since they still had a detention. The reason being for crashing a flying car into school, nearly running a few freshmen into the Black Lake. After silently mourning for Ron for a moment, Harry ignored Colin, who was busy collecting the remnants of his camera. He turned to Hermione. I want to visit Hagrid, this week has been. He took a deep breath and mumbled, incredibly unfortunate. Hermione naturally had no objections, and the two walked out of the pitch together, heading towards the Forbidden Forest. Wait, what's that? Seeing a lavender figure emerge from the path's end, Hermione squinted to verify what she was seeing, but Harry quickly pulled her beside him, and they squatted within the trees by the road, watching the shadow that had been lingering in their minds float past from afar. Harry finally exhaled in relief. Professor Lockhart. What is he doing here? It seemed Hermione wanted to go out and greet him, but noticing the expression on Harry's face, she hesitated and ultimately refrained from it reluctantly. I don't know. Harry shook his head, only finishing the first half of his thought. He couldn't understand why girls like Hermione would fan over someone like Lockhart, who was all looks and no substance. From what he knew, most of the Gryffindor boys had seen through his facade. It wasn't until Lockhart's figure had completely vanished that the two finally emerged from the trees. They briskly circled the last shrub at the crossroads, and the view ahead opened up. The light blue sky was dotted with a few languid clouds, the treetops of the Forbidden Forest gently swayed in the breeze, and a somewhat shabby cabin stood isolated on the forest's edge. A mound of variously sized pumpkins was arrayed in front of it. The most noticeable among them was as large as a carriage. Engorgio. Following the sound, they saw a tall boy in a dark blue wizard robe standing on the clearing in front of the hut. As his magic wand gently waved, another pumpkin rapidly grew larger, causing the boy to take a few steps back. Isn't he, the fifth-year transfer student? Harry scratched his head. What's his name again? William Richard. I've been seeing him in the library quite a bit lately, Hermione said. You should remember the name of your savior, Harry. Harry, you've finally come. I've been wondering when you'd visit me. The next moment, a large figure appeared from behind the cabin, and Hagrid placed the huge pumpkin in his arms down and came forward, Come, sit inside. Wait, Hagrid, Harry waved his hand. We just saw Professor Lockhart on our way here. Oh, there's no need to listen to anything Lockhart says, Harry. It was rare for Hagrid to speak like that about a Hogwarts professor, but an unmistakable look of disdain appeared on his face. If he had real skills, I'd eat all these pumpkins. Then you're probably going to be eating until Halloween night. William's voice came from the side, and as he pocketed his wand after successfully enlarging the last pumpkin at his feet, he approached the group. Oh, I haven't introduced you yet. Hagrid tapped his forehead. This here is William, you should know him. William, you should remember Harry. Then, this young lady is Hermione. He gestured towards Hermione to introduce her to William. Oh, right, is Ron not with you today? Hagrid seemed to remember something suddenly. Hello. William smiled and extended his hand to Harry. Front and center, Harry instinctively shook William's right hand, glancing up slightly to meet a pair of deep blue eyes that sparkled like gemstones. He noticed William's gaze fixating on the scar on his forehead. Harry normally disliked having others stare at his scar, but oddly, he didn't feel any discomfort at the moment. On the contrary, Harry even felt a warm sensation flowing from his scar, quickly engulfing him entirely. This peculiar, yet comforting feeling momentarily left Harry a bit dazed. Being wrapped in this warmth felt as if he were seeing. It doesn't look particularly special. William scrutinized the boy in front of him, too thin, with somewhat messy black hair and a pair of green eyes. The legendary savior seemed no different from those ordinary little wizards, except for the one striking feature, the lightning-shaped scar zigzagging across the boy's forehead. The killing curse. William had consulted numerous records and rumors, none of which detailed the events of that night in 1981. People only knew that Harry Potter was the only one to survive Voldemort's killing curse, and from that night onward, the once invincible Dark Lord vanished completely. Naturally, the boy who lived became the focus of excited crowds. But, perhaps the boy has some potential that's not immediately apparent. After all, main characters ought to have some sort of aura or cheat. William pulled his hand from the boy's unconsciously clenched right hand, while Harry remained standing, dazed. As if without realizing, tears began to gather around his eyes. Harry! Harry! Hermione noticed this point and shook the boy's shoulder. The push seemed to bring Harry's senses back to reality, and he reflexively responded, tears leaving 2 streaks down his cheeks. Harry, what's wrong? Hermione asked curiously, and Hagrid also put aside wondering why Ron hadn't come to see him, and approached with concern. Mum, no, I'm just a bit. Harry felt his vision blur and reflexively raised his hand to remove and wipe his glasses, only now realizing that he was already tearful. He looked up at William, the blurred figure in his sight seemed to remind him of someone else. Wait, what does this longing look mean? Although Harry's almost inaudible, Mum, was barely heard, William still unfortunately caught it. After a short silence, William decided to change the subject, even without touching the issue of gender. He had no interest in becoming the savior's mum. Hagrid, perhaps you should take him inside. William pointed to the wooden hut behind them. Oh, right. Hagrid finally snapped out of it, pressed Harry's shoulder with his hand, and the group entered the hut together. Maybe you need some candy, Harry. Hagrid clearly thought Harry recalled something sad and placed a large plate of syrupy toffee on the table. William picked one, slightly too sweet, but rather good apart from sticking to the teeth. Woof woof. A shadow darted out from under the oversized bed, circled the people in the room 3 times, evaded Hagrid's large hand, and then eagerly burrowed into William's arms. Fang. Hagrid's face hidden under his beard turned slightly red, clearly noting William's cloth gradually turning from blue to black. No problem. William waved it off. He'd always had a way of attracting these small animals. Not initially, but until he dismantled the 126th poacher's base in the Forbidden Forest, the little critters began to approach him ever more closely. Even after 100 years, it still seemed the same. Scourgify. As the magic wand swept, Fang's saliva marks disappeared, and his mouth began to bubble with pink foam. Fang stared with round eyes at the bubbles drifting by, a bit bewildered before letting out a burp. Hagrid. Hermione swallowed the sticky toffee. Ron was supposed to come by today and be brought back to the castle by Professor McGonagall for casting a spell on Draco Malfoy at the Quidditch pitch. What happened to them? Because Malfoy called me a mudblood, which sounded rude, but I don't know what it means. Hermione shook her head, her messy and fluffy hair lightly swaying. Did he really say that? Hagrid slammed the table, the loud noise even pausing Fang's pink bubbly trail for a moment. Hagrid, what does it mean? Since entering the house, Harry finally moved his gaze from William's hand and uttered his first words. It's a nasty term, most consider it as such, used by pure-blood wizards to insult half-blood or muggle wizards, meaning dirty or inferior lineage. William explained, he had been insulted this way often, if such words could be considered a real insult. Having long been used to the pinnacle level of national curses, the Black Wizard's vocabulary was far too limited to even make him react. After all, these blustering Brits often only say, your mum doesn't love you, compared to the occasional, I love your mum, levels, it's more like whining. Hope Ron won't get in trouble. If he cast a spell on Malfoy, I'm confident Lucius Malfoy will storm into the school shortly. Hagrid seemed deflated, saying dispiritedly, his dad is on the board, but with Professor Dumbledore around, he absolutely won't let any student be expelled without cause. Hagrid took a deep breath and barely managed to change to a slightly happier expression. The air in the room was silent for a moment. Apart from the still bubbling Fang, the others engaged in combat, with the toffee in their mouths. By the way, Harry. Hagrid seemed to suddenly remember something. I need to settle accounts with you. Heard you sent out signed photos, why didn't I get one? Harry seemed a bit annoyed, finally casting aside the feeling from earlier with William's handshake, struggling to open his mouth clamped by the toffee. Is Lockhart still spreading those rumors? His voice was somewhat muffled, the tearing pain in his mouth making him nearly cry again. Ha ha. Hagrid laughed, patting Harry on the shoulder. I said earlier, Harry, whatever Lockhart says, you don't need to listen, he's completely spouting nonsense, you don't need any effort to be more famous than him. Did you tell him that? No, it was William who chased him off. Oh, you'd have seen Lockhart's face then. Hagrid seemed to recall the scene and laughed heartily again. Lockhart. William sighed somewhat helplessly. After only 2 short lessons, he roughly saw through Lockhart's facade. A complete fool, not even capable of basic spells. He thought Dumbledore really should get his eyesight checked. If the entire school consisted of professors like Lockhart, Hogwarts would shut down by tomorrow. Right, we just saw you with. Hermione finally freed her teeth from the toffee. That was the engorgement charm, wasn't it? Yes, Professor Sprout had me help Hagrid with the Halloween preparations. William nodded. By the way, since Professor Kettleburn got stung by Billywig and is at St. Mungo's Hospital, I'll need Hagrid's help regarding questions about magical creatures. I'll do my best to assist, William. Hagrid's voice was somewhat subdued, appearing uncertain, but I'm not sure if I can be a good teacher. Oh, don't worry, Hagrid, Professor McGonagall told me you absolutely could. In current Hogwarts, no one understands these animals better than you. Really? She actually said that. Harry saw Hagrid's face visibly beginning to turn red. So, you want to know about werewolves. At least that's the case for now. Boosted by William's compliments and encouragement from the little ones, Hagrid confidently asked William to state his problem. But strictly speaking, that's not within the scope of magical creatures, and it doesn't seem to be part of 5th-year classes. Defense against the dark arts, I know. William's tone was filled with resignation, but I also need to study the courses from the previous 4 years, Hagrid, it's for the OWL exams. Hermione, looking very surprised, took a sharp intake of breath, contributing to global warming. Oh, alright. I almost forgot about that. Hagrid paused, as if he just remembered that the boy in front of him was still a muggle before the summer break, so those questions you asked Lockhart before. Yes, exactly those, like the homorphous charm. William sighed, flipping through those fairy tale books during boredom. So upon seeing Lockhart, he planned to verify the authenticity of the spells mentioned in those books. But as expected, after answering a few nonsensical questions, Lockhart made a quick excuse to leave, looking displeased. Originally, I intended to ask Lockhart, but evidently. William grinned, thankful that the professors he met at Hogwarts 100 years ago weren't as unreliable as Lockhart. Otherwise, dealing with the Goblin Rebellion and fighting dark forces then would have made passing the exams impossible. Although William had an extraordinary talent in charms, he was still at an average level in many areas. For instance, his magic history was only barely passable. Being able to attentively listen to a whole class in Professor Binns' classroom without nodding off, is superhuman. Since Professor Dumbledore chose Lockhart, he certainly must have his reasons. Hermione quietly defended Lockhart but gradually lost confidence as she spoke. It seemed like she was the only one supporting Lockhart in the room. That's because he's the only choice. Hagrid shook his head. It's hard to find a defense against the dark arts teacher nowadays. People think the job is cursed, and nobody stays long. Ahem, let's get back to werewolves. William tapped the table, steering the topic back on track. The homorphous charm from those fairy tale books sounds less like fiction. Sorry, William, I've never heard of that spell. Hagrid shook his head. I haven't read Lockhart's books either. It's in Wanderings with Werewolves, where Professor Lockhart used this spell to defeat a Wagga Wagga werewolf. Hermione raised her hand as if answering a classroom question. He also cured it, saving the village from werewolf attacks. Hermione, have you memorized all of Lockhart's books? Harry gasped, looking utterly shocked. Well, but if you ask me. Hagrid rubbed his nose, mercilessly shaking his head under Hermione's expectant gaze. That's sheer nonsense. If a simple spell could cure lycanthropy, the Ministry of Magic wouldn't always be troubled by werewolf attacks. Oh, all right. Hermione opened her mouth but eventually sulked into silence. So it's impossible. William frowned, making a note in the small notebook in his hands. Then, the werewolf clan in the Forbidden Forest. That's just a rumor. Hagrid barked, visibly excited. Even Harry noticed something amiss. Is that so? William nodded and made another note. 4. Werewolf clans in the Forbidden Forest. Square root. 5. Authenticity of the homorphous charm. Doubtful. Needs further verification from Lockhart. As noon approached, William closed his notebook, politely turned down Hagrid's lunch invitation, and left the cabin with the two young ones. Fang, having exhausted all his pink bubbles, tried to hide behind William as they headed back to the castle but was swiftly caught by Hagrid. Grr. Harry's stomach let out a growl. He hadn't had breakfast yet because Wood dragged him to the Quidditch pitch. He was so hungry he could barely speak after eating just a little toffee. After bidding farewell to Hagrid, the trio walked back to the castle, parting at the entrance hall. Harry and Hermione headed directly to the Great Hall for lunch, but William had no such plans. He turned and headed towards the Hufflepuff common room downstairs. I wonder how Ron's doing. Hermione said, pulling Harry to sit at the Gryffindor table, drawing the onion soup before her. I still think he might get expelled. Then you might be disappointed. The peculiar voice chimed above them, prompting them to look up, seeing Ron standing behind them. He wore a red and black robe, his soft red hair loosely fitting on his head, evidently freshly showered. Ron. Hermione blinked, disregarding his tone. I'm so glad you're okay. MMPH. With his mouth full of meat, Harry solemnly nodded. Just for now. Ron squeezed between them, grabbing 2 drumsticks from the platter. Tonight's another story. I have detention. With Filch. No magic, cleaning trophies. A whole week. He lamented, starting to gnaw on the drumsticks. MMPH. Harry mumbled questioningly. By the way, Professor McGonagall said you have detention too. You'll be helping Lockhart write fan letters. Ron patted Harry on the shoulder, with a hint of sympathy. MMPH. Harry's eyes widened as he hastily swallowed. Why? I'd rather clean trophies. Supposedly, Professor Lockhart requested you. Ron shrugged, then remembered something, conspiratorially lowering his voice. But don't worry, Malfoy's joining you. Filch has too many hands, and to make sure we all have work, Malfoy's been assigned to Lockhart too. That only makes it worse. Harry wailed, diving back into his meal, turning his grief into appetite. Clearly, the night wasn't going to be easy for him. Hey, William. A call in the Hufflepuff common room halted William's steps. Instinctively, he hid the greasy bag beneath his wizard robe before turning to look. I say, are you interested in Quidditch? Cedric Diggory raised a hand, pulling William by the shoulder, then sniffed. Wait, what's that smell? Bandits. A group of bandits. Looking at the kebabs in his arms, now almost half gone, William's mouth twitched slightly. He decided he'd never again bring food into the Hufflepuff common room. These badgers usually seemed gentle, but the moment they smelled food, they became more boisterous than one another. Anyone who had spoken to him even a little over the past few days came over to grab some. But you can't blame them. In Great Britain, where food culture is completely lacking, where a famous restaurant is French, and the best dishes are often Indian, such aromas, created from a pile of spices, are indeed hard to resist. Unlike the Ravenclaws who hide in their towers, these badgers aren't shy about helping themselves to William's snacks. Especially Cedric. Cough, cough, a bit spicy. While coughing, Cedric completely cleaned the meat from the skewer with his teeth. He licked his lips in longing, his gaze unconsciously drifting back to the now empty paper bag in William's hand. Go to the kitchen and find an elf named Ruck. Knocking Cedric's hand away as he reached for the bag again, William said grumpily. He was usually kind to others and didn't mind sharing, as long as his own needs were met. Whatever was left should be enough now. As for the skewers taken by the badgers, hopefully, some big doggy won't be upset. On his first trip to the dining hall, William discovered his recipes from over 100 years ago had been lost, but that didn't stop him from writing a new one. After all, the house elves in Hogwarts' kitchen were always happy to help. Oh, all right. Cedric nodded regretfully. By the way, about the Quidditch I mentioned earlier. Not interested. William shook his head, promptly refusing. In the 3 years he spent at Hogwarts, the Quidditch Cup was cancelled twice by the most unpopular headmaster ever, Blake, so he naturally never joined a team, despite being a good flyer. He was also never interested in the sport itself. He preferred sneaking out at night to flick gobstones at the headmaster's office windows rather than chasing a ball on the field. That's a shame, you fly really well. Cedric shook his head, looking a bit disappointed, but he didn't dwell on it. After a brief chat, he and a few students made plans to head to the dining hall together. William didn't linger either. He returned to his dormitory, where the room was empty, with only the bed on the far left neatly made. The wrinkle-free sheets made one suspect whether the person who owned the bed was obsessed with tidiness or if no one lived there at all. Closing the dormitory door behind him, William quickly moved to the wall beside the bed. As he stood there, the once blank wall began to transform, bricks turning out to reveal a simple red brick fireplace in front of William. Warm yellow flames burned inside the fireplace as William picked up an iron box placed on it. Taking a handful of silver powder from within, he sprinkled it onto the flames. The next moment, green fire leapt up, and without hesitation, he stepped into the flames. Room of requirement. A suffocating smell assaulted him, and the spinning dizziness made William close his eyes, but the sensation didn't last long. Soon, the world calmed, and William stepped out of the fireplace. He opened his eyes, and the scene before him had completely changed. Warm sunlight streamed through the lattice windows on the ceiling, and the deep blue tiled floor added depth to the room. A large bookshelf reaching up to the ceiling exuded an ancient aura. In contrast to the dormitory, the fireplace here was intricately designed, with flames dancing warmly in orange-yellow tranquility. This was the room of requirement, once William's secret base. A week ago, when William first returned, aside from the dust on the furniture and a missing house elf, it seemed like nothing had changed in over 100 years. Everything preserved as it was before William's time travel. Thinking of this, the boy instinctively touched the necklace at his collar, and the broken golden hourglass swayed gently. Although on the surface William had been gone for a century, to him, it was merely over 2 months. The short summer had hardly made him feel estranged, and after a quick tidy-up, including covertly linking the fireplace to the flow network, he moved all his belongings here. 100 years have passed, and now it's a room solely for him, impossible for anyone to find without William's guidance. But before William could reach the table to put down his paper bag, a shadow suddenly leapt off the banister, crashing straight into his arms, but with swift reflexes, William easily caught the attacker in his palm. Ah, you little rascal, what have you found again? Weighing the niffler in his hand, William scratched its tummy in amusement. It was bulging just as he expected. Without hesitation, he lifted the niffler's pink paw and, under its innocent gaze, gave it a shake. With a jingling clatter, numerous small, shiny trinkets fell to the floor. All right, you've earned me £5 British again. William placed the dizzy Niffler on the table and reached down to pick up the most noticeable golden galleon among the trinkets. He had encountered this Niffler near the Forbidden Forest a couple of days ago. Thanks to his friendship buff with animals, he easily coaxed it back home. He initially left it on the grass that grew outside the room of requirement, but somehow, it found its way into the room again. The Nifflers he had raised before didn't have such tricks. Could it be that Nifflers evolved over the century? Bang! At that moment, a loud crash suddenly echoed from not far away, followed by a hoarse growl. Though the words were indistinct, the voice clearly conveyed a foul mood. William didn't mind. After cleaning the floor with magic, he grabbed the paper package and the Niffler from the table and walked towards the sound. Turning past 2 cabinets and descending the stairs, he was met with the sight of a large stainless steel cage. The figure squatting at its center stared intently at William, restraining the urge to pounce, eyeing the unassuming stainless steel bars with apprehension. Those bars had indeed caused him no small amount of trouble. "Good afternoon, Mr. Greyback." William smiled, sitting back as a chair conveniently grew from the ground to catch him. "It seems you're in a fairly good mood today." Fenrir Greyback sneered disdainfully, but the slight twitch of his nose betrayed the man's inner craving. "Hungry?" William asked knowingly. Nonsense. He had starved the other party for 2.5 days in advance. Fenrir still did not answer, but his eyes couldn't help but glance at the grease paper bag in William's hand. Although the pungent spices covered most of the smell, he could still detect a faint mutton scent. It was lamb. The man took a deep breath, trying to control, finished, even hungrier. As one of the most notorious werewolves in the British magic realm, Fenrir's least skilled ability was controlling the desires within his heart. From some unknown point, the slaughter on every full moon night could no longer satisfy his cravings, so even when not under the full moon, he started wantonly attacking muggles, even consuming human flesh, just to satisfy his inner bloodthirsty urge. After the Dark Lord vanished without a trace, he chose to leave the magic realm, wandering through various Muggle communities across the United Kingdom. To reduce risks, he forced himself to decrease the frequency of assaults on Muggles, but the monthly, routine business, he never thought to, nor could stop until that full moon night 2 months ago. He woke up in a pitch-dark room, and there stood a boy. When the Crucio curse landed on him, he even thought the Dark Lord had returned. He thought he would die on that night, but for unknown reasons, the boy spared his life, although he would rather have died on the spot. Unable to bear the hunger in his stomach, the man straightened his back with difficulty. He gazed into the boy's slightly glowing dark blue eyes. "I told you, I don't know. Ever since the Dark Lord disappeared, I have no contact with them at all. I don't believe it." William scratched the belly of the Niffler in his hand. The little creature, almost recovered, still tried to burrow into William's embrace. He casually lifted his eyes, the radiance in them growing ever more luminous. "Speak the truth, there can be a reward." "I fooling already told the truth." The man snarled irritably. He raised his hand as though to seize the cage but withdrew at the last moment. Phew! As the hunger in his abdomen grew increasingly unbearable, he forcibly calmed down. "I truly don't know where those remaining Death Eaters have gone. Perhaps the Ministry of Magic has locked them in Azkaban." "All right, since you don't want to speak." "Wait, I'm not done speaking." The man's pace of speech quickened abruptly. He pointed his finger at the wall behind William. "But that box, its owner knows the location of a werewolf community. That was my previous target." Werewolf community. William's action of rising paused. He turned his head. The wall bore the traceless extension box seized along with this werewolf at the time. "All right, speak carefully." The boy nodded, gesturing for the man to continue speaking. "After the Dark Lore Voldemort left, I've been independently detached from the wizarding world for many years. Recent years have been relatively quiet, so I plan to reorganize a force, a werewolf army." Fenrir paused, "But my kind hides extremely well, even I find it hard to locate them. Therefore, I accepted a commission, with the reward being the location of a werewolf community. Transport these magic materials." William looked to the other side. The magic materials had been taken out and sorted into categories on the shelf. Fenrir nodded to confirm. "A well-hidden werewolf community. You think they will agree to you organizing an army?" "No, sir, the Ministry of Magic's oppression of us werewolves is stronger than you imagine, so we internally contain a force, they merely lack a leader. As long as you let me complete the trade, this force can immediately be at your disposal." Fenrir seemed to have made a decision, his head slightly drooped, and his tone began to turn respectful. Internal force. William chuckled. You mean using this force to attack children? Hee hee, sir, our members still need expansion. The man seemed not to hear the sarcasm in William's tone, instead, he too grinned, exposing a mouth full of uneven sharp yellow teeth. Many werewolves, led by Greyback, would treat spreading the werewolf disease as their mission, hoping that one day they could create enough werewolves to rule the magic world. And attacking children with undeveloped minds made it easier for them to instill the idea that wizards are enemies. All right, seeing as you're so loyal. William nodded, directly tossing the paper bag in his hand into the cage. Are you planning to let me out? The man suppressed the impulse to immediately pounce toward the paper bag, instead, he stared at William with expectant eyes. Of course, no, some things always require personal experience. A hint of strange color flashed in William's eyes, he shook his head, took out his magic wand, hair, Accio. A coarse gray hair fell into his hand. Time, place, person, speak. The first weekend of October, Hogshead Inn in Hogsmeade, we have a contact signal. Is there anything else? Yes, sir, also one piece of information, if you attempt to approach Hogsmeade, you may try contacting a Death Eater named Severus Snape. He should be at Hogwarts now, though I don't know how he fooled the Ministry of Magic. I can guarantee with my life, he was once the most loyal follower of the Dark Lore. Voldemort. Snee, all right, I got it, shut up. Yes, sir. Fenrir showed no discontent, only his head drooped lower. Just stay put. In the future, 1 meal a day for you. William stood up, while pulling out a notebook from his pocket, walking to another room. Wait, where's my pen? Until half a minute after William's figure completely disappeared, Fenrir finally lifted his head, his ferocious face filled with a smile he never expected to so simply leave. As a fugitive wanted by the Ministry of Magic for decades yet still at large, of course he knew how to play the role. But now it seems, this little brat called William is much like Voldemort. Arrogant, eager for others to bow to him. However, now he reckoned he'd save his life, because even Voldemort couldn't possibly solely control so many werewolves, by then he'd still be needed to play the role of leading wolf. As long as he stayed alive, the opportunity for reversal would always emerge. But for now, the man lowered his head, looking at the paper bag full of aroma and temptation. He couldn't wait to crouch down, clawing open the paper bag, beginning to ravenously devour the lamb. Wait, where's the meat? Staring at the paper bag filled with spice-coated flatbread, the man blinked blankly. 1. October 3, 1992, Hogsmeade, Hogshead Inn. The third table on the right after entering will have a woman in a deep purple cloak sitting there. 2. Using ancient magic to manipulate emotions still needs improvement. Adjustments in force are required. 3. Severus Snape was once a Death Eater. 4. Werewolf community. He returned the pen pulled out from the Niffler's belly to it, and William scratched his hair. He certainly wasn't swayed by Fenrir's mention of a werewolf army. Quite the contrary, he always thought these child-endangering beasts all deserved to die. His current dilemma is, using the werewolf's hair to make polyjuice potion, shouldn't have any negative effects, right? Looking at the nearly liquid grasshopper in the cauldron, William casually fiddled with the weeds in the adjacent flower pot. The soft green leaves drooped upon touching his fingers but soon returned to their original state. According to the polyjuice potion recipe, fluxweed must be harvested during the full moon, and there's still time before meeting in early October. To ensure polyjuice potion works, the person being transformed must survive, so this werewolf can't die anytime soon. But William didn't intend to kill him directly anyway. Just like the emotional amplification magic, he had a ton of potions and charms awaiting validation, and this werewolf is destined to be the perfect guinea pig. However, during this interrogation, the thing that surprised William the most, yet seemed justifiable, was Snape's past as a Death Eater. William didn't fully trust the werewolf's information, but he believed the truth in this matter was quite likely. William had plenty of reasons in mind. First, upon meeting Snape, his black wizard radar went off immediately. If it weren't for the other explaining his identity as a Hogwarts professor, William's plan was to follow him after he left to see if he could catch a big fish. A black wizard being a professor wasn't uncommon at Hogwarts 100 years ago. In fact, the faculty lineup back then was even more unusual. former Aurors, former Unspeakables, former professor of Uagadu, there was even a patriarch of the Sacred 28 serving as headmaster. It's just a former Death Eater, and the current configuration is pretty ridiculous too, like having a half-blood giant guarding the Forbidden Forest. Learning of a certain, former, Death Eater professor's negligence during holidays, in the first week of the new school year, almost all professors, under Professor McGonagall's guidance, offered one-on-one tutoring to quickly familiarize him with magic. Just as it was 100 years ago, though the charms they taught, William even knew better than the professors, he still completed all the tutoring sessions. Not only because Professor McGonagall mentioned it might reduce written assignments, like the 7 inches of essay about vanishing spell. He naturally gained other, unexpected gains, too, looking at rows of Chinese chomping cabbage on the other side of the room of requirement, along with a few pots of mandrake stacked in the corner. Professor Sprout's greenhouse was almost plucked bare by him. Although this remained in the scope of natural classroom consumption, the speed of consumption still raised alarms with the professor. He needs to keep a low profile recently. He also attempted to sneak into Snape's office. Professor of Potions' office is practically a treasure trove, it's common knowledge, but Snape's vigilance and hostility were as he said. During the 1.5 hour of brewing Vitality Potion, he found no method to escape Snape's gaze. After all, Snape's office and the bathroom aren't in the same direction. Of course, the professors providing after-class tutoring to William didn't include Lockhart, though he was on the tutoring list too. Pulling out the Niffler sniffing into the hat, William put down the notebook. The side quest received from Fenrir would keep him busy for a while, but tonight, he has an even more arduous task. All right, you can come with me tonight. Watching the Niffler biting his sleeve, refusing to let go, William cradled its butt and tucked it into his arms. He wasn't afraid of the Niffler stealing anything from him, as all golden galleons were secured in a magically sealed pocket, with no way for it to get inside. Tossing a handful of flow powder into the fireplace, William returned to his dormitory with the Niffler. The brick wall spun, and the simple fireplace reverted to a bare wall again. The Niffler, rarely silent after days without stepping out, sat quietly on William's shoulder, its sparkling eyes watching the warm light burning at the foot of the bed. For Harry, if there's anything more disgusting than helping Lockhart respond to admirers' letters in the world, it's definitely sitting with Draco Malfoy, then helping Lockhart respond to his admirers' letters. Enduring dual physical and psychological disgust, Harry even felt somewhat envious of Ron. Though Filch wasn't better than Lockhart either, at least in the Metal Room he had Gryffindor friends for company, while sitting with Malfoy. Thinking this, Harry almost instinctively turned his head for a glance. And as if telepathically connected, Malfoy sitting to his left also instinctively lifted his head. Noticing Harry's gaze, the boy's face, even paler than usual, squeezed out a sinister smile. Don't guess, Potter. I already wrote to my father, he'll have the principal expel that red-haired fool from Hogwarts soon. Tell him what? You vomited 2 liters of slugs. Harry lowered his voice and snapped back without hesitation. Where do you usually hide them? In your head. Saying this, Harry deliberately looked Draco up and down a few times. Draco's pale face instantly turned a shade redder. He seemed to want to explode but quickly remembered they were in Lockhart's office. He glanced at Lockhart, utterly absorbed in fan mail, then gritted his teeth and spoke low. Just wait, first Weasley, then that filthy mudblood, and finally you. All of you will be expelled. Hogwarts isn't the place for people like you. Ha! Harry seemed inclined to sneer in response, but before he spoke, a hoarse voice suddenly echoed in his ear. It was completely different from Malfoy's curses and Lockhart's mutterings. It was a creepy, chillingly malicious voice. Come closer, let me tear you apart, kill you. A deep, hollow voice as if from hell. What's wrong, Potter? Scared. Malfoy's lip curled instinctively upon seeing Harry's suddenly frozen expression. Or perhaps I can give you a chance. Kneel and apologize to me now. I might consider sparing you, how about it? But that Mudblood and Weasley will still be expelled. What did you say? Harry's voice involuntarily rose, causing Lockhart, entranced in his own world, to snap back to reality. What? Wait a minute, Merlin's red underpants, has it been 4 hours already? The man glanced at the time, instinctively standing up. Time really flies, doesn't it? Lockhart looked at the two sitting at the table, smiling. All right, your detention is over. You may go now, but remember, not every detention will be as light as this one. Didn't you hear it just now? Harry abruptly interrupted Lockhart's prepared closing remarks. What kind of madness are you on? Watching Harry, whose expression had been peculiar since just now, Malfoy frowned and asked. By this time, they had already left Lockhart's office, or more accurately, been expelled from it. Lockhart was clearly displeased with Harry interrupting his speech, but his status as a professor made him politely invite the two out of the office. Shut up. Harry snapped without hesitation, and he looked around, somewhat bewildered. The dim defense against the dark arts classroom was empty except for him and Malfoy, with the chandelier of burning candles swinging gently on the ceiling. Ha! If you're worried about being expelled, you can always come to me, Malfoy sneered. Although he didn't know what was wrong with Harry, mocking Harry Potter seemed almost ingrained in his bones. The terms I mentioned earlier are still effective. Ha! I wouldn't bow to a fool whose head is stuffed full of slugs. You. Malfoy took a deep breath and quickly headed towards the classroom door. He stopped at the doorway, seemingly wanting to throw some harsh words back at Harry, but the next moment, the heavy wooden door slammed onto his forehead. Thump. Does it sound good? A good sound means a good knock. Stumbling from the collision, Malfoy fell on his backside, clutching his forehead, glaring angrily at the unexpected intruder who burst into the classroom. Went the wrong way again. Looking at the somewhat familiar classroom, William mumbled as he turned the map in his hand, but the niffler sitting on his shoulder had a completely different opinion. It used its short forelimbs to tap William's cheek, squeaking loudly as it occasionally pointed at the map in front of him. William. Harry was somewhat surprised and instinctively called out the name of the newcomer. You're the transfer student from Hufflepuff. Malfoy glared at William with a face full of anger, his pallor turning into a disturbingly crimson hue. He opened his mouth as if wanting to mock, but when he locked eyes with William's deep blue ones, he found himself completely speechless. Harry Potter. William looked around the classroom. So, is he stepping into some main storyline? Good evening. Harry walked up, seeming somewhat restrained. We were just detained, so are you looking for someplace? He clearly noticed William's mumbling as he entered, and the Hogwarts map he was holding. This was a map William had clipped from a copy of Hogwarts, a History. At this moment, Harry had already pushed aside the whispers from hell earlier, looking at William standing outside, yet his mind was filled with the warmth of grasping the other's right hand earlier this morning in front of Hagrid's hut. Why does he keep staring at my hand? Feeling a bit uneasy from being stared at, William instinctively stepped back, and at this moment, Malfoy dashed out of the classroom. He surprisingly didn't turn back to throw harsh words at Harry, but instead ran quickly down the stairs without looking back, his hurried footsteps quickly fading away into the air. Yet the two standing at the door clearly paid no attention to Malfoy's departure. Because William didn't want to be seen as the savior's mother, he chose to hide his hand behind his back. I'm looking for a dragon sculpture that should be inscribed with Hogwarts' motto, Draco Dormiens Nunquam Titulandus. Never tickle a sleeping dragon. Sorry, I don't know where that is. It's understandable, Hogwarts paths are indeed hard to recognize. William wasn't disappointed, and the niffler sitting on his shoulder nodded as well, but I remember it should be underground, yet I've circled 3 or 4 times in the Slytherin dungeon. But this is the 4th floor. Harry opened his mouth, seemingly unsure what expression to make. Would you believe me if I said I don't know how I got here? Once inside the castle, William's pathfinding attribute was maxed out, and he sighed helplessly. He had spent 2.5 years secretly connecting most fireplaces in the castle to the flow powder network, ensuring he wouldn't be late for class every day. But those fireplaces, either dismantled or expelled from the flow powder network over the past 100 years. Now, to get to where he used to go, he could only circle around the castle looking. Fortunately, the room of requirements position wasn't too hellish, and he found the tapestry of the troll clubbing Barnabas on the 8th floor in just 2 days. Harry nodded, then shook his head because every time he saw the other, he would vaguely feel that warm wrapping sensation, making his attitude towards William somewhat peculiar. All right, detention is over, you should head back to your dormitory. Come, extend your hand. William grabbed the niffler that had just crawled back onto his shoulder, indicating Harry to extend his palm. After the boy cradles his hands in front of him, William's wrist started to exert slightly, as 10 or so golden galleons dropped into the boy's hands as they shook. That should be all, I'll be leaving now. Poking the Niffler's dazed belly, William turned and walked in the opposite direction of where Malfoy had disappeared. Wait. I wanted to say, thanks, for saving me and Ron earlier above the Black Lake, Harry hesitantly said. Oh, you mean that? It's nothing. William shook his head, his figure disappearing at the end of the corridor. Watching the disappearing back, a faint feeling of loss welled up in Harry. His goal in calling the other was to once again feel the warmth he felt earlier in the morning, but in the end, he wasn't sure how to express it. He barely organized his feelings and familiarly returned to the Gryffindor Tower. Fooper. The fat lady's portrait swung open. Harry climbed into the common room with hands and feet. Harry, you're finally back. Having an adequate number of people, they finished detention early, and Ron, who was now center stage dancing in the common room, turned his gaze. He was presently embellishing the story of his outstanding achievements against Slytherin earlier that morning to the other young lions, waving when he saw Harry appear. How was Malfoy's expression tonight? Was it spectacular? More or less. Harry said weakly, his mood still on the mend, but suddenly remembered Malfoy's mention of Ron's potential expulsion, so he scanned the room. Where's Hermione? Don't know, haven't seen her. Ron clearly noted the perfunctory tone in Harry's voice, but assumed it was due to Harry being ravaged by Lockhart for 4 hours. So, did Malfoy say anything to you? No. Seeing the excitement on Ron's face, Harry shook his head. He knew the answer his friend craved wasn't the one he provided. After greeting Ron, Harry dragged his weary body back to the dormitory. Laying down on his bed, his hand lifted to rub his brows. Harry felt he was forgetting something very important. But when he tried to recall, he simply couldn't remember. Meanwhile, in the tower dungeon. Finally, looking at the spiraling staircase in the room's center leading downward, William nodded in relief. He'd managed to avoid losing his way until morning. Thanks for watching.